I don't believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural. But that night was weird. This is a 100% true story retold to the best of my recollection. It was my senior year of high school, and my two friends, Nick and Noah, and I had this weekend ritual exploring any supposedly haunted place we could find. We'd scour the internet for lists of local ghost stories and creepy spots, ticking them off one by one. Most were disappointing, just urban legends or strange coincidences. There was a forest where there was a light at a specific time in the night. We never saw it. There was a bridge where you were supposed to honk at midnight, flash your headlights 3 times, and something magical would happen. Nothing ever did. Then we saw a name at the bottom of the list, the Norp House. Apparently it was once a plantation house. When Union soldiers came to free the slaves, the owner hung them from the trees surrounding the property rather than let them go. Over time, the house had fallen into disrepair, with just enough updates to make it livable before it was abandoned for good. After some debate, we decided to explore the house. So the weekend rolled around, and around 3 a.m. we packed into my Pontiac Bonneville for the 30-minute drive to the house. The rain was light but steady, the kind that settles into your bones, and the road's dead. I know it was 3 a.m. But we saw not a single car. The house was set back from the road, gated off, with only a small gravel lot nearby where we could park. It seemed like a maintenance area for the adjacent railroad. The lot was clearly visible from the road, and we joked nervously about how easy it would be for a cop to see my car and suspect we were up to no good. Still, we had no other choice but to park there. The first thing we noticed was the gate, or rather what was left of it. 2 brick pillars flanked the entrance to a long, overgrown dirt driveway. Whatever gate had once been there was gone, replaced by 3 cement blocks that made it impossible for cars to pass through. We climbed over them, officially stepping onto the Norp property. The online list had called these brick pillars the gates to hell, claiming they had some mystical effect on anyone who walked through. I didn't feel anything supernatural, just the chill of a damp October night. As we continued down the path, the woods grew thicker, and without our flashlights we would have been lost. The trail was barely visible, and we kept stumbling, losing our footing in the mud. After what felt like hours of navigating through the trees, we reached a shallow creek. I crossed easily, thankful for my waterproof boots, but Noah, who'd worn slides of all things, cursed under his breath as he waded through. Just when we started doubting whether we were even on the right path, I shined my flashlight ahead, and there it was. A massive white wall loomed out of the darkness, so sudden and imposing that it made my heart skip a beat. The house seemed to have materialized out of nowhere, its decrepit form nearly swallowed by the overgrowth. The roof had partially collapsed, scattering debris across the yard, and part of the basement wall had caved in, exposing its insides. A rusty air vent dangled precariously from the basement ceiling, creaking in the wind. We approached the house cautiously, circling around the side in search of the front door. The property was so overgrown that we felt like we were trekking through a forest, vines and thorns tugging at our clothes. Then we heard it. A faint shuffling sound just ahead of us. We froze, exchanging uneasy glances. It was the kind of sound that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up, as if something or someone was stirring in the basement that had access to the outside thanks to a broken-down wall. My first thought was that a homeless person had taken up residence in the house and we were about to trespass on their territory. See, I knew it wasn't a ghost, but I thought it was either a guy or a deer about to charge me. "Back up," I whispered, motioning for Nick and Noah to retreat. We all backed a few feet, then stood still, straining our ears, and the shuffling sound grew louder. The wind had died completely, and yet the noise continued. "Is that a guy? Or an animal?" I called into the darkness, gripping my pocket knife tightly. In retrospect, it was a dumb question. What was I expecting? An animal to answer, "Hey, yeah, I'm just a raccoon." Still, the tension was palpable, and I wasn't taking any chances. I edged forward, my knife at the ready, the shuffling sound intensifying with every step I took. 1 step closer. Another. And then I saw it, the terrifying creature responsible for all the noise. An armadillo. The 3 of us relaxed, the tension evaporating as quickly as it had come. I pocketed my knife, feeling both ridiculous and relieved. We inspected the little fella just minding its business and decided to leave it be and not explore the basement. We continued our trek around the house, finally reaching the front door. There wasn't actually a door there, but I assumed that's where the door was supposed to be. Inside, the house was even worse than we'd imagined. The floors were covered in shattered glass, walls battered as if someone had gone at them with a sledgehammer. Graffiti covering the few walls that remained, some of it surprisingly artistic, some of it just messy tags. The layout was straightforward: 4 rooms on the bottom floor, 4 on the top. The 4th room on the bottom floor was completely caved in. The floor had collapsed, creating a hole that led straight down into the basement. The floor above was in nearly as bad a shape as the one below, so we decided to steer clear of that area and head upstairs instead. We passed the stairs leading to the basement. Well, I guess they weren't stairs, as there were none, just a sheer drop. I was relieved I had my flashlight. Without it, I might have missed the 9-foot drop onto the rubble and concrete below. The stairs up were steep and creaky, their worn carpet treads barely clinging on. Upstairs, the back left room contained remnants from previous explorers, a grill and a few beer cans. I guess the people before us were much less creeped out than we were. Eventually, we finally reached the master bedroom, essentially 2 rooms without a separating wall. The room was empty, covered in graffiti, and still without any furniture. At this point, no ghosts had shown themselves, so we decided to bring out the big guns, a Ouija board. Nick had brought it along, and we set it up in the middle of the room. I placed my phone leaning on the support pillar in the middle of the room, providing light and filming the session. We gathered around the board, placed our hands on the planchette, the Ouija triangle thing, and began the ritual. The first question we asked was, "Is anyone there?" To our shock, the planchette began moving. We were all adamant we weren't moving it. I still talk to Nick all the time, and he still promises that he was not moving it. And Noah also promises it wasn't him the last times we talked about it. The answers it spelled out were nonsensical random letters and numbers that didn't make any sense. We kept asking questions, and we would keep getting random letters as answers. We were about to call it quits. Then Noah decided to ask, "Are you the owner or are you a Cell A?" Before he could even finish his question, the light from my phone abruptly shut off, plunging us into darkness. It took a moment for me to switch on my other light, and when I checked my phone, I found that the battery was completely dead. I had charged it fully before we left, so I still don't know how it happened. We sat there, feelings of fear and confusion fighting for power. Breaking the silence, Noah suggested that maybe supernatural entities feed off electrical power. It really didn't make us feel any better, and I didn't buy into that anyway. After the Ouija board and the unsettling phone blackout, we decided it was best to cut our exploration short. I didn't want to risk having my car spotted by the police, so we quickly packed up our things and made our way back downstairs. As we passed the gaping hole leading to the basement, the graffiti, and the destroyed walls, the cold autumn rain hit us again as we stepped outside. We made our way back to the rear of the house, glancing back at our armadillo friend, who seemed to have found shelter from the rain among the remains of the basement. As we made our way through the trashed rear of the house, the silence was suddenly shattered by the roar of an engine. The sound was coming from the direction where I had parked the car. There shouldn't have been anyone else around. We heard the sound of tires screeching and gravel being kicked up. Panic set in. We immediately assumed that high schoolers or someone were messing with my car. We decided to run back to the car as quickly as possible. In my mind, I hoped I locked the doors or that they wouldn't break in. Mud covered our shoes and pants as we sprinted through the creek and up the trail. I was no longer cold, but instead sweating from the running. Reaching the gravel lot, we jumped over the concrete blocks at the gate to hell and finally arrived at my car. We stopped. There was no one around. The engine noise had completely stopped, and there was no sign of anyone having been there. Looking back, I don't even remember the sound fading like they were driving away. It's almost like it just stopped, like something wanted us out of that house and did whatever they could to make that happen. And it worked. We got into the car, locked the doors, and went home, relieved that no one was hurt and my car was unharmed. To this day, I don't believe in the supernatural, but that night was weird. And that's my story. I've had a few experiences over the years. The most terrifying ones were in this house I lived in from the age of about 9/10 until I was 16. I shared a room with my older sister at the time. It was quite a large room. We both had single beds. Mine was directly opposite the bedroom door on the left side of the room. Hers was on the opposite side of the room, but facing the same direction. One night, I was woken up in the middle of the night by something physically poking me behind my left ear twice. I always slept on my right side and saying, "Hello, hello." I woke up all blurry-eyed and looked at the end of my bed to see a figure stood there. I hid under the covers, absolutely terrified, for maybe about 20 to 30 seconds and eventually mustered up the courage to take another look. I pulled back the covers to then see the figure had moved and was now standing at the end of my sister's bed. At that point, I hid back under the covers and I think I just passed out from fear. I could still feel the pressure behind my ear from where I had been poked when I woke up in the morning. After that experience, I was not able to sleep with my ear out of the covers until I was nearly an adult, even for a couple years after I moved out of that house, because I was so scared it would happen again. I didn't tell anyone at the time, but I told my sister a few years ago, and she admitted to me that she had also woken up once in that room to see someone standing over me. There was a couple more experiences in that house. Another one was the first night my mom ever left me alone in the house. This was after my siblings had moved out and gone to uni. I was upstairs in my room when all of a sudden I hear my dog, who rarely barked, start barking downstairs. I come out my room and look down the stairs to see the front door wide open and my dog just stood there barking at it. I go down to close it and take a look outside to see no one even close by, and no one had come in the house. Apparently the woman who lived in that house previous to us had died there, and I imagine our bedroom was likely where she passed. I've had a few more experiences in recent years and in different houses. Shortly after my dad's mom passed 3 years ago, I woke up one night for seemingly no reason. I only ever wake up in the middle of the night if I need the toilet or if someone physically wakes me. And this was a house I rented with a friend. I opened my eyes and saw someone stood there. It didn't scare me and I shut my eyes, not thinking much of it. Then thought to myself, hang on. Opened my eyes again and they were still there. I blinked, still there, so I turned my lamp on and then they vanished. I'm sure it was my gran. I wasn't scared at all, and the figure was her height and build. I was also woken up around the same time to someone gently touching my hand. Again, I'm sure it was her. My gran and I were so close. She passed during COVID from cancer, and 2 days before her funeral I caught COVID and wasn't allowed to attend, which was horrible. I wrote something for the funeral celebrant to read on my behalf and had to watch on live stream. I felt so guilty I couldn't be there, even though it was out of my control. And I think those experiences were just her letting me see her one last time and telling me it was okay. I've dreamt of her once since then. I know she's always looking after me just as she did when she was alive. Also, after my mom's mom died around 6 months after my gran, I went to go stay at my mom's one night. This was a few days after she brought some of her ashes home, and the living room light flickered when I walked in the room. This had also happened when my brother had gone round one night with my mother, and had only ever happened since her ashes were brought home. I also saw a dog toy move completely by itself the same night the light flickered. Again, I'm sure it was my nan just letting us know she was there and she was okay. I miss both of my grandmothers very much.
Tim and Laura had always wanted a quiet life. Their cozy home, nestled at the edge of the woods, was supposed to be the perfect place to raise their children: Bonnie, 6, who was lively and imaginative, and baby Tyler, only 1, with big, curious eyes and an infectious giggle. At first, Bonnie's stories of her imaginary friends were charming. She would speak about a lady in her room who watched over her at night, or a little boy who played hide and seek with her in the house. Tim and Laura brushed it off as normal childhood imagination, smiling as Bonnie's creativity flourished. But soon, the stories became unsettling. One evening, Tim was reading to Bonnie before bed when she interrupted him, her voice oddly calm. "Daddy, why does the man in the hallway stare at you all the time?" Tim felt his stomach drop. "What man, sweetheart?" "The man by the stairs. He's sad. He said he doesn't like it here." Tim forced a smile, trying to shake the unease settling over him. "There's no man, Bonnie. It's just your imagination." But Bonnie's expression remained serious. "He says you shouldn't ignore him. He watches you when you sleep." Tim didn't sleep well that night. He didn't mention it to Laura, afraid she'd laugh it off as he had done before. But something about the way Bonnie said it, with such certainty, made him feel like something was watching him. Days passed, and Bonnie's friends became more frequent visitors in her stories. Laura grew uneasy when Bonnie talked about them playing with baby Tyler. One afternoon, while Laura was making lunch, she heard Bonnie giggling upstairs. Curious, she followed the sound, only to find Bonnie in Tyler's room, standing next to his crib, whispering softly. Bonnie, who are you talking to? Laura asked, her voice strained. Bonnie turned slowly, her smile unnerving. The lady. She likes Tyler. She wants to hold him. Laura's breath caught in her throat. What lady? Bonnie pointed to the corner of the room. There. But the corner was empty. Just shadows. Laura felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. She scooped up Tyler, who was unusually quiet, staring wide-eyed at the same corner Bonnie had pointed to. His little lips were quivering, his hand reaching out, fingers clutching at the air. Tyler, baby. What is it? Laura whispered, her voice shaking. Tyler's tiny mouth opened as if to speak, but all that came out was a soft, whimpering sound. Laura carried him downstairs quickly, her heart racing. That night, everything changed. Tim woke abruptly, hearing a strange sound over the baby monitor. It wasn't Tyler's usual cries, it was something else. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Then, a soft, high-pitched giggle. He jumped out of bed and rushed into Tyler's nursery. There, standing beside the crib, was Bonnie, her face expressionless, her hand resting gently on Tyler's chest as he lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Bonnie, what are you doing in here? Tim demanded, his voice barely concealing his panic. Bonnie didn't move. She stared down at Tyler and whispered, "The lady said she'll take him soon." Tim froze. "What did you say?" Bonnie turned to him, her eyes wide and dark. "She's waiting. She's just outside the window." Tim spun around, his eyes darting toward the window, but all he saw was the blackness of the night, the trees barely visible in the pale moonlight. He grabbed Bonnie by the hand and led her back to her room, his heart pounding in his chest. She didn't resist, didn't speak, just walked silently beside him. When he returned to Tyler's room, he found the baby sitting up in his crib, his eyes still fixed on the window. And then, in the silence, Tyler spoke his first word. But it wasn't Mama or Dada. It was a whisper, barely audible, but clear enough to chill Tim to the bone. Cold. Tim's breath caught in his throat. He stared at his son, disbelief and fear clawing at his mind. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice trembling. Tyler blinked, his tiny mouth forming the word again. Cold. Laura rushed into the room, hearing Tim's panicked voice. "What's going on?" He spoke. Tim stammered. "But," he said cold. Laura looked at him, confusion and fear mixing in her eyes. "What?" "That's impossible. He's only a baby." But Tyler was still staring at the window, his lips trembling, as if he was trying to say something else. Then he began to cry, not the usual wail of discomfort, but a shriek of pure terror, his tiny hands grasping at the air as if pushing something away. The following days were a blur of sleepless nights and eerie occurrences. The temperature in Tyler's room was always colder than the rest of the house, no matter how high they set the thermostat. Objects would disappear, only to reappear in strange places. Bonnie became increasingly withdrawn, her once cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet, watchful stillness, and Tyler would stare into empty spaces, his eyes following something unseen, sometimes reaching out, as if trying to touch something or someone. One night, as Tim and Laura sat in the living room, they heard a sound from upstairs. A soft, rhythmic creak, like the sound of a rocking chair. But they didn't own a rocking chair. Rushing to Tyler's room, they found the crib empty, the window wide open, cold air gusting in, and there, standing in the corner of the room, was Bonnie, holding Tyler in her arms. "She wants him," Bonnie said, her voice flat and emotionless. "She said he belongs to her now." Tim lunged forward, grabbing Tyler from Bonnie's grasp. But as he did, something cold brushed against his skin, something that wasn't there. He stumbled back, clutching Tyler tightly, feeling a chill so deep it felt like it seeped into his bones. Laura screamed. The shadow in the corner seemed to grow, its form stretching, twisting, almost human but wrong, as if it were trying to claw its way into the room. "We have to leave," Laura shouted, grabbing Bonnie. But as they fled, Bonnie looked back, her voice barely a whisper. "She's coming with us. She's not done yet." As they drove away from the house, Bonnie sat in the back seat, holding Tyler close. Her eyes, dark and knowing, flickered to the empty space beside her, and she smiled. "Tyler's cold again," she whispered. And in the dark silence of the car, Tyler's voice, soft and eerie, answered, "Cold. When I was a kid, my family lived in a small, creaky house on the edge of a forest. The house was old, but my parents loved it for its charm and solitude. They always said it was the perfect place for us to grow up. One evening, while my parents were out for a dinner date, I was left alone with my older brother. Josh, we were playing video games when the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. It was a typical power outage, nothing out of the ordinary. We lit some candles and carried on, trying to make the best of it. Around midnight, as we were finishing up a game of Monopoly by candlelight, we heard a soft knocking sound coming from the attic. At first, we thought it was just the house settling, but the knocking persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Josh, always the braver one, decided to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and made his way up to the attic. I stayed downstairs, nervously glancing at the flickering candlelight. The knocking continued, but I could hear Josh moving around up there. After a while, he called down to me, "Hey, I think you should come up here." I hesitated but went up to the attic. The room was dusty and cluttered with old furniture and boxes. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror covered with a sheet. Josh had been searching through some old boxes and had uncovered the mirror. The knocking sound had stopped. We stood in front of the mirror, its glass covered in grime. Josh reached out and wiped it clean. We both stared at our reflections, but something was off. The mirror showed not just our reflections but also a shadowy figure standing behind us, its face obscured by darkness. I turned around quickly, but the attic was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. We were both spooked but chalked it up to an overactive imagination. Josh decided it was time to head back downstairs. As we descended, the house felt colder, and the knocking started again, now coming from the floorboards beneath us. We bolted downstairs and tried to call our parents, but the power outage had cut off the phone lines. When my parents finally came home, they found us huddled together in the living room, pale and shaken. We told them about the knocking and the figure in the mirror, but they dismissed it as a product of our imaginations, a side effect of being alone in the dark. That night, as we tried to sleep, I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I peeked out of my room and saw a man standing at the end of the corridor. He was tall, with hollow eyes and a vacant expression. His clothes were old-fashioned, and he seemed to be wearing a long, tattered coat. I screamed, and my parents rushed out of their room, but when they turned on the lights, the man was gone. They searched the house but found nothing. Years later, when I moved out of that house, I learned that it had once belonged to a man who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. He was said to have lived alone, with no family or friends. The locals believed he had been trapped in the house, never able to leave. Every time I look back at that night, I wonder if the man in the mirror was him, reaching out for help, or if he was trying to show us that he had never truly left the house. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something dark and restless still lingers in that old house, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor to witness its horrors.
I found a pizza delivery job just 10 minutes from my flat. It's great as it's closed and I know the area and so I cannot really get lost. It's such a simple job, really, and it makes me enough money to do everything that I need. Now I need you stress that I live alone, and ever since I started working at a delivery pizza takeaway store, the only place I ever seem to deliver to is to my own flat. That sounds absurd because I live alone, and if I am work, then how can deliveries come from my flat? It's true, and I remember the first I got a delivery order from my own flat. I had to deliver it, and I was calm. I knocked on my flat, and some weed-smoking hippie opened the door and took the pizza and gave me a great tip. My flat looked different inside and had a load of hippies inside. I then drove back to the pizza delivery place, and I got another pizza delivery from my flat again. I was knocked out of the park by these deliveries all coming from my flat. I delivered another pizza again to my flat on the same day. This time an obese, lonely man opened the door. The flat looked completely different, and it smelled horrible. The hygiene of the place was putrid, and I gave the pizza to the obese guy, and he tipped me as well. All night long, I was delivering pizzas to my own flat. Then when I went home to my flat, it was completely empty, and it was back to being my flat. It was incredible what I had just experienced, and I had no idea who those people were. At least I got paid and tipped all at the same time, and I didn't have to deliver far, as all of my deliveries were to my flat. Ever since working at the pizza place 2 years ago, I have just been delivering to my own flat. I see all sorts of people opening the door and my flat inside looks completely different. I have delivered pizza to my flat where murderers had opened the door and there was blood all over the walls. I have even delivered pizzas to my flat and non-human figures had opened the door from inside the flat. Then I come home and it is exactly the same as I had prepared it. Then one day I get another pizza order to my flat like usual. When I get to the front door of the flat, the person who opens it is myself. I look sad and I have blood on myself and there seems to be another person lying on the floor. I give the pizza and just go back to work. This was a question I was used to hearing most of my life. No matter the situation, no matter the people around me, there was always a nagging fear in the back of my mind telling me that something bad was going to happen. Something was going to go wrong. I just always wanted to hide. Upon a friend's suggestion for me to get guidance about my life, I reluctantly went to a psychic. The psychic did a reading and I held my breath the entire time. I really didn't want to hear anything bad. Finally, she spoke. I don't foresee misfortune, but I ask, what is it? But there will be a single tragedy. And with that, she walked away from her seat, a clear indication that our time was up. Confused and distraught, I awkwardly left without saying another word or questioning her strange answer. The whole drive home, my mind was racing. What did she mean by a single tragedy? Only one. What could it be? I didn't know what this entailed, and after a few days of pondering, I decided to go with the idea that she meant it as the death of a family member. My grandfather was getting quite old, so maybe that was it. Even though her words stayed at the back of my mind, nothing really changed after my visit to the psychic. I continued to cut through my days. My mental state stayed at the miserable place that it always was. I would console myself by remembering that every morning I woke up was a day closer to death. Eventually, I graduated and got my first job. I decided to move in with my partner, and after 5 years, we got married. Another 3 years later, we welcomed our baby boy into the world. Despite the many milestones I had gotten to experience in my life so far, I spent most of my days anxious and my nights depressed. I had always been more of an introverted and reserved person, so after getting married, I pretty much isolated myself from all my friends. I often turned to substances in an attempt to escape the prison that my mind trapped me in. I couldn't even remember the last time I was present in the moment. But it didn't seem to matter anymore. Nothing did. One morning, the day after my 35th birthday, I was driving to the store to pick up some groceries. It was a normal Sunday routine in our home. And that's when it happened. A semi-truck crashed into me head-on, and I lost conscious instantly. I awoke at the hospital to the murmurs of several nurses and doctors surrounding me. There was blood everywhere. I couldn't move, and I was in excruciating pain. I could see and hear my surroundings, but I couldn't speak. A little while later, I saw my husband near the entrance of the hospital room I was in. I heard my husband ask frantically, "Will she be okay?" The doctor sighed. "There is a very small chance your wife will be able to survive from this accident. She is essentially in a vegetative state from sustaining all the injuries the collision caused. We are doing the best we can. I'm sorry." I didn't hear much after that, because the nurse put me under for an emergency operation. While under the anesthesia, I had a very lifelike dream. I was me, well, the me before the accident, and I was sitting near a crystal globe watching my entire life replay again. I saw my friends, my family, my schools, my husband, my child, my goals, my dreams, my ambitions. I saw everything. And for the first time, I saw the beauty in the life I had. I could feel joy in the air when my friends and family came to my graduation, the delicious dinner I had when I got the promotion at work I never thought I would get, the love and the kiss my husband and I shared on our wedding day, the warmth when my baby was born and placed on my chest. I could feel everything, the good and the bad, and I was so happy to feel. It felt like I was watching a movie, yet these were all experiences I lived through. I couldn't even remember feeling these emotions during those moments. All I remembered was the nagging worries at the back of my head and the urge to just go home and crawl under my bed, away from the world. I felt alive. When I awoke, I could see terrified faces looming over my head. Something felt off in my body, but I was too numb to figure out what. All I knew was that my head was spinning and I was slowing down. I heard the nurse say, "Oh my God, Oh my God, maybe we shouldn't have had her go through with this operation. Another nurse exclaimed, well, what else could we have done? You heard what the doctor said. This was the last chance we had at saving her. It wasn't a success, and now her vitals are dropping fast. I really don't think she is going to make it, but we can at least try. Hurry. Go get the ventilator now. As I heard the other nurse run out of the room in a panic, my body began convulsing. I finally realized what the psychic meant all those years ago. I finally realized how much I missed out on my own life, and here I was now, about to die. I tried to scream, I want to live. Please, I want to live. But nothing came out, and just as I heard the nurse's footsteps rushing back towards my hospital room, everything went black. And that was the biggest tragedy of all. So I can't remember what year it was exactly, but I think it was around 2013. I had been living in Seattle, but I moved back home to my parents' house for a short stay, a few months, to get back on my feet before I could move to Tacoma. I came back in late summer and was gone to the city after Thanksgiving. During that time, I started to hang out with some folks from the old gang people who stayed after high school. One of the people we hung out with, her grandparents owned a home overlooking a lake. It was awesome. We had some excellent parties there. Now, Ashley, all names changed for privacy, and her family owned this home for a while, since the mid-1980s, and she told us about an accident that happened. It was summer in the early 90s, and her father's friend died there. She was fuzzy on the details, but it was a jet ski accident, and he drowned in the lake. Apparently, they drug him to shore, but were too late. I'm not sure that explains what happened to us, but I just wanted to preface the story with that could have been a factor. It was late fall in 2013. My friend Chris and I were waiting on our respective girlfriends at the time, getting ready for a Halloween party that night. He was sitting playing some PC game in the corner, and I was watching some horror movie on TV. At this point, it was dark, pretty pitch black, a dry night. I remember I went out back to smoke, and I kept hearing a strange noise. The noise sounded like something slapping around in mud or muck. Not a strong thud, but weak, just enough to grab my attention. I could hear it coming from around the lake. At this point, my buddy Chris is out here smoking with me. I asked him if he heard that noise. He said he did so. Without really any real hesitation, we started to investigate. In some reeds, we found a huge decaying salmon still alive. Its eyes were whited out, and whatever kind of rot it had, it was affecting its whole body, rotting while it was alive. We were baffled. I don't know much about local flora and fauna, but from what Chris and I both knew, salmon didn't run in that lake. No sea access. That was weird. We chalked it up to the magic of Halloween. You know, weird shit happens. It wasn't Halloween, but good enough explanation. We just didn't really want to think about that sickening flopping sound. The ladies now finally ready. It was time to move out. We had a good time at my friend's house party, but after we headed back to the lake house, I failed to mention my friend Chris had moved in there recently. It was late. The girls had gone on to sleep, but Chris and I were hopelessly addicted to a MOBA called Heroes of Newerth at the time, so we wanted to get in a game. Who cares how many beers we had? During the game, we noticed the windows of the house were open, wide open. It was cold in the house. It's October in Washington State, talking 40 degrees outside. We had both our computers set up in the kitchen area since no one used the tables for anything. Chris got up and shut each window. They were the kind of window that slide open from the bottom, so you needed to slide the window up to open it. After the game, we went out to smoke, a pretty common practice for us. As we were getting up, I heard Chris say, "What the hell, I closed these. The windows were back open. Wide open like before." He closed them again. This time I saw with my own eyes. We smoked, went back inside to our computers, and as we entered the queue for another game, I noticed that once again the windows were open wide again. At this point, we thought a friend of ours was trying to mess with us. A friend who knew we'd be there. It was a pretty common hangout spot for all our friend group. People dropped in all the time. So we looked out in the driveway and everything checked out, all the normal cars. Chris and I started to get spooked. Someone is messing with us, and not one of our friends. We armed ourselves. Chris had a Big Mag flashlight made out of metal. I grabbed a big knife out of the kitchen drawer. We thought at this point it was time to go take a look around the house. The fog was starting to come in off the lake. If you've never seen fog creep and stretch, it's a weird thing. It's slow, but also almost in a heartbeat. It's covering the land in wisps, just enough to fool you. It dampens noise too, so every tree branch you snap under your feet sounds different, like it's just for you to hear. The flashlight was weak. It was old, so we just got a few feet of light. We looked around the house, starting out front where the driveway was. We looked by the cars, checking to see if our cars were fine, and we moved from there to the side of the house where the windows were. No one around. At this point, the lake couldn't be seen. It looked like it was made of smoke, just so thick with fog nothing could be seen. That's when we heard something at first, very softly, ... It was music. A song I have never heard, the slow roll of the piano. Both Chris and I were thrown off by the sound of the music. "You're hearing this music, right?" he asked. "Yeah, man," I said back. We were practically holding hands at this point, standing shoulder to shoulder, nearing closer to the back door. The music was starting to get louder or just closer to us. Chris, with his flashlight, started looking in all directions trying to find the source. It sounded like it was coming off the lake. If it was a boat or something, the fog would part, we would be able to see something moving. Nothing moved but the music, some somber tune I could never make out. If I ever heard it again, I would recognize it. The music has never left me. Chris and I were both pretty unnerved by the situation unfolding. We went inside and locked the doors once again, the windows wide open. Chris closed them, and I remember this so vividly. Chris closed and locked the windows, and he looked white. He turned around and said I could hear the music off the lake. We went to bed snuggling in with our ladies, who were none the wiser. The next morning, I remember being woken up by Chris' girlfriend complaining how cold it was. The windows were left open overnight. Chris and I are still close friends. We discuss this every few years. We have never really landed on what the music was, or what was up with the fish, or even weirder, the windows that wouldn't stay closed. We don't know about if any of it was connected, or the untimely drowning that happened, if it had any connection. What I do know is that I never heard the music again, and neither did he. It was a bitterly cold night in 2018 when I moved into an old, weathered house deep in the countryside. The kind of house where the nearest neighbor was miles away and the nights were so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. This place had a reputation, and the nearby village people whispered that it was haunted, but I dismissed it as just another old wives' tale meant to scare off city folk like me. The first few nights passed uneventfully. The house was drafty, the floors creaked with every step, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. That was until the fifth night, when everything changed. I was settled in the living room, reading by the dim light of a single lamp. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but I paid it no mind, absorbed in my book. Suddenly, a faint scratching noise broke the silence, coming from the ceiling above me. I paused, listening intently, but the sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. I chalked it up to a rat or some other small creature, though unease began to creep in. But then the scratching returned, louder this time, as if nails were being dragged across wood. I stood up, my heart beginning to race. The scratching moved, traveling from the ceiling to the walls, circling the room. It was as if something was trapped behind the wallpaper, desperately trying to break free. Panic set in, but I fought to stay calm. I grabbed a broom and banged it against the wall, shouting, "Get out! Get out of here!" The noise stopped, and the house fell into an oppressive silence. I took a deep breath, convinced it was over. But then the lights flickered, and the temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath in the air, forming a mist. The rancid odor that followed was unbearable, like rotting meat. The stench was overwhelming, making me gag. I covered my nose, but the smell seemed to seep into my skin, clinging to me. I stumbled back, my eyes watering, and that's when I saw it. In the darkest corner of the room, something was moving. At first, it was just a shape, a dark mass growing, stretching toward me. As it came closer, I saw it was a figure tall and twisted, with long, gnarled limbs and eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. It moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in seconds. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move as it reached out with one bony hand, its fingers ending in sharp black claws. The creature's face was inches from mine now, its breath hot and putrid against my skin. It grinned, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and whispered in a voice that was both a hiss and a growl, "You shouldn't have come here." The room spun, and I felt myself being pulled into the darkness, into the creature's cold, unrelenting embrace. I fought to stay conscious, but it was like being drowned in ink, suffocating and cold. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. When I woke up the next morning, I was on the floor, the room filled with sunlight. The creature was gone, but the smell lingered faintly. My body ached, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw deep red scratches down my arms and neck, as though I had been clawed by something. I couldn't stay in that house another night. I packed my things and left, not caring where I went as long as it was far from that place. I never discovered what that creature was or why it targeted me. But I know one thing for certain: I'll never forget those glowing eyes or the pure, unrelenting terror that accompanied them. To this day, I still feel like something is watching me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And I'm terrified that next time I might not be able to be open. After saving up for many years, my wife Millie and I finally were able to afford our first home. Thanks mostly in part to Millie's great-uncle, who, when he passed, left his estate to several family members. Millie's great-uncle, I must admit, had the opportunity to meet him, and when he passed he did not have a wife or children, so he left his estate to be sold and divided up amongst several family members, including Millie. Millie and I had saved up over $100,000, including her inheritance, and started looking at homes. Unfortunately, in our area, homes still seemed way out of reach. We were able to get a pre-qualification on a home loan for $450,000, which helped when putting offers on homes. For months it seemed like nothing was in our reach. We would put an offer and almost immediately someone would bid higher than us and higher than what we could afford. Our realtor was such a trooper, he would contact us immediately if a home went on the market, so we would be first to bid. However, after the first 2 months of shopping, we started to let our hopes diminish. One evening we got a call from our realtor and he was kind of hesitant about giving us all the details of the house. Other times he would say things like, "You're just going to love the size of the kitchen, granite countertops, hardwood flooring, bonus room, or new roof." You know, trying to sell us on the house so we could put a bid in immediately. This time he is slowly giving details about the house: 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, split-level home. When pressed, he offered more details, but not at all like he was trying to sell it to us. Yes, it has a fireplace, central heat, and AC. He said, "I want you to come and look at the house and maybe have an inspector look at it before you bid." He said that the house has sat vacant for a few years and really needed a lot of upgrading. What he didn't know was that Millie and I had resigned ourselves to the fact that buying a fixer-upper was more in our future than a move-in ready, all-updated house. Millie said we will have many, many years to fix it up room by room. We made an appointment to view the house the following Saturday morning. That morning we both woke up with such excitement, and we thought today is going to be our day. When we arrived to the address, we were a little disappointed to see several other cars of home buyers there with their realtors. However, we marched in and started to look around the house. We noticed that other younger couples and one older couple, well, they were not impressed with the house. I had heard one lady tell her husband, "No, this place is a dump." The older couple just walked through checking out each room and then left. Pretty soon Millie, our realtor, and I were the only ones left inside. I had brought a notepad and started making notes. The kitchen was straight out of the 1970s, yellow appliances, dark brown cabinets, and a yellow sink. The flooring was that old linoleum flooring that looked like fake stones. The fridge was in pale green color. I looked at Millie and said, "This is the room we are definitely starting with first." The rest of the house was pretty much as you would expect. Old wood paneling, green shag-like carpet that had been matted down over the years so that you could see each pathway and look newer where furniture once stood. The bathrooms were the same, a yellow and green decor, except for the master bathroom. It was fancy in pink and gold. As we move on to the downstairs area, this really got my attention. It reminded me of like the Rat Pack 1960s era. You could tell there was once a pool table in the center of this larger den, a built-in bar area. Everything was dark wood and red leather bar stools, and the leather trim around the bar was red. Behind the bar was marbled-looking mirrors and glass shelves. I thought to myself, I like this room. Millie had other ideas. I had made notes about the house. We figured that the kitchen and the bathroom were going to be our biggest expense, as the rest of the house is just new paint and flooring. The asking price for the house was $565,000. I told our realtor we should offer them $525,000 because that house needed at least $25,000 in upgrades. I knew our bid was going to get rejected, but what the hell, let's try it. Our realtor put in the office. We took him out to our favorite Mexican cantina for lunch and said our goodbyes. That night, Millie and I talked about all the upgrades that house will need. We were almost like talking ourselves out of it, but without saying the words. We woke up the next morning and decided to go to church, so as we were getting ready, my cell phone rings. It was our realtor. He said, "Congratulations, they accepted your offer." A whirlwind of shock, excitement, and terror hit me all at once. Millie looked at me expecting to hear bad news. I hung up with our realtor, only saying, "Thank you for letting me know." I turned to Millie and said, "Well, we just bought a house." We both looked at each other with the same emotions that I had just described. Moving day. Paris. The day we get the keys to the place was about 45 days after the phone call. Of course, we were not ready to move in. There was so much work. I had hired a guy that my old next-door neighbor recommended. He was hired to do the kitchen and bathrooms. I wanted to save money, so I took up doing painting around the house and putting down the type of laminate flooring you get at your local home center. There was something odd about the house that I noticed. This happened when I was doing a little diagram of the house and noticed what seemed to be a void. There was an area between the lower level and the upper level that seemed to be like a void. There was a wall that ran along the wall downstairs that connected that room to the rest of the house. It just seemed odd. I had rented one of those renovation dumpsters that you can get from your trash company to fill it up with construction debris, and I was tossing sections of that old green carpet outside and met our first neighbor. He was an older gentleman named Joe. Joe had thought I worked for the homeowner and not the actual homeowner. I introduced myself and said I just bought this place. He looked surprised and said, "Oh, welcome to the neighborhood." He said, "Hey, why don't you take a break and come have a beer with me?" I agreed, as it sounded good anyway. We walk over to his garage, and he had it fixed up like a little man cave, lots of neon signs and fishing decorations. He had a pretty large garage fridge, and it was just filled with drinks. He handed me a cold can of Coors, and we sat down. He said, "Did they ever tell you the story about that house?" I told him, "Actually, no. All we were told was that it sat empty for a few years, and that the family eventually wanted to sell it." He said, "Well, yes, it sat empty for a few years, but before that, did you know what happened?" I said, "No, but I could tell he was eager to get on with what he was going to tell me. Something like the place was haunted or someone was murdered there. However, in our state, it was mandatory that kind of information be disclosed." He lowered himself down with both elbows on his knees like a coach getting ready to give a talk to a team. He said, "Well, it was a bit of a mystery for many years. There was a lot of talk and speculation about what happened. He said the house used to be owned by a couple who the husband had just retired and both kids left the home on to college or something. Anyway, one day I see several police cars there and the wife standing outside talking to them and smoking one cigarette after another. Apparently her husband had just vanished. He left his wallet, car keys, car, everything behind, not so much as taking a change of underwear with him. No one saw him leave, and there was no signs of a disturbance. The police checked around the house, they looked in the backyard, they checked with former co-workers, they checked with his friends and family members. Heck, they even checked to see if there were any signs of him having a mistress. The whole town was papered with his missing posters. Months and months passed. I saw his wife slowly decline almost into madness. Her sister came to pick her up one day, and just before she got into the car, she broke down in front of the garage door crying out for her husband. It was an interesting story, and one I was going to have to Google later on that night. Joe eventually said that the wife never came back to the house. However, a gardener would show up every 2 weeks, and a few times the kids would come by. Pretty soon it was only a gardener and no one else. He boasted, but us neighbors, we took it upon ourselves to look out for the house, mostly chasing off teenagers who would try to break in. I thanked Joe for the beer, but reminded him of all the work needed. He said, "Well, if you need to borrow a tool, ask Tony across the street, because I don't lend tools out." He winked and laughed. I almost immediately forgot about the story Joe told me as I went back into a world of flooring, paint, and baseboards. Our master bedroom and master bathroom were the 2 first rooms of the whole house to be officially upgraded and ready. However, Millie insisted on not fully moving into the house until we had a working kitchen. So I started working on what I could inside and outside of the house. One Saturday morning I was at the house alone. Millie had a cousin's baby shower to attend. I didn't want to go, so I opted to do some work in our downstairs swanky den. But there was that wall that seemed out of place and had a different color of wood paneling, so I decided to remove that section of wood paneling and just paint that wall instead. Maybe it would brighten up the downstairs and Millie would let me keep that room and get a pool table. I had noticed a small door that was kind of hidden in the paneling. I had no idea how to open it. There was a small hole. Not a keyhole, just a hole that you could see something went in there at one time. So I grabbed my pry bar and forced the door open. To my surprise, it was a closet. I looked at the latch that had locked the door closed, and it looked like there used to be a string attached to it, but it was broken off. You know, like a string, sometimes people have to open a exterior side gate. Inside the closet were some old records, a bowling ball, some bottles of Seagram's gin and Kessler whiskey, an old coat hanging. I immediately start to remove the items and take them to the dumpster. I set the bowling ball aside. Maybe I will use it to decorate the room later. I started removing the paneling inside the closet and noticed another door. This time there was a string there. Stupidly, I left my cell phone upstairs, go grab a flashlight, but the only one I could find is a small 2 AA flashlight that I had got at a trade show. I went back into the closet, and pulled the string to the second door inside the closet. As I open the door, I see the first door close on its own. I step inside and turn on the light. It's a whole other little den, just as I am fully inside the door that I just came through closed on its own. I use my flashlight to look back behind me, and I noticed a spring closure attached to that door. I am stuck inside this room. I use my little flashlight to look around. The room is pitch black dark. It smells of musty, sweet, moldy, mixed with wet newspaper kind of smell. I spot a lamp on a little table and click to turn it on. Click, click, nothing. I continue to scan around the room and spot an old 19 TV on a metal TV cart. I click the TV on. A warm glow of static appears. Thank God the TV works enough to give me light. I see over in the corner of the room another lamp. It was one of those huge glass lamps that everyone's grandma had back in the 70s. I walk over to it and click, it turns on. Finally, I felt better. At least I could now see. As I turn around, I see a chair and someone sitting in it. I let out a scream that if any of my friend had heard, they would have never let me live it down. I screamed like a little schoolgirl and fell backwards, hitting a pile of magazines on the corner. I look over at the person sitting in the chair. He looks asleep. I bring the lamp a little closer to look and see that his skin is almost black, leather-like, and looked like one of those mummies I saw many years ago at a traveling ancient Egypt exhibit. Was this the missing homeowner that crazy neighbor Joe mentioned? I look around the room and found an old crochet Afghan and cover him up. I thought to myself, great, I am stuck in this room with a dead guy. I don't have a cell phone and no one knows that I am locked in here. I tried my best to calm myself and try to think, what time is it? What time will Millie come back to the house? Maybe she will stop at our apartment first to change, then come and meet me. Surely she is blowing up my cell phone. Then another thought chilled my heart. My cell phone was on one bar when last I looked at it. I had forgot to plug it in to charge. Oh well, it wouldn't do me any use anyway. I was locked in here with a dead guy and it could have been miles away. I look around the room thinking of different options. One thing that I thought about was how old was that light bulb in the working lamp? How long will it last? I began to look around the room and look for anything I could use to help me get out of there. I thought if only I had taken my crowbar with me into that room, but it was just on the other side of the second door. The room was long and narrow, but widens at the point where the dead guy was. He had made himself what seemed to be a little hideaway. Did his wife know about this room? Did she lock him in on purpose? Did she know he was here all this time and went mad knowing his corpse was in here? God, I hope he came down here to get away and died of natural causes. As I look around the room, there was his chair, his little TV on a TV stand, a small coffee table and a bunch of coins on it. Off to the side was an army green filing cabinet, a stack of old National Geographic and TV Guide magazines. I look down the other end of the room and spot one of those old film projectors. I know those also have light, so I set it up and plug it in, ready just in case my lamp or TV stopped giving out light. I continued to look around the room for a screwdriver, metal rod, hammer, or some kind of tool that I can use to get that door open. The metal filing cabinet's drawers were locked. The cabinet itself felt heavy. I pulled, banged, and kicked that cabinet, but it was solid. I tossed it over and over again until finally one of the drawers gave way. I opened it up and it was just full of the guy's coin collection, mostly old coffee tins filled with old pennies. I walk over to the door and notice that this door, unlike the outer door, was much heavier. The outer door was a solid core slab door, like kind of builder would use for exterior door, but the inner door, the door to this room, was much more than that. It felt like he had made this door from 4x4 lumber and sheet metal. Maybe he built this room as a bomb shelter, or before safe rooms were a thing, maybe that was the purpose, or maybe he just wanted a safe place to keep his pennies. Unknown to me, yes, Millie was blowing up my phone almost from the moment I stepped in the room. At first, she thought that I was just working and had the music blaring, but as evening approached, she started to worry a little bit. She came by the house a little after 9 p.m. and saw my car in the driveway. She thought it was odd as no lights were on inside the house. The front door was closed but not locked. She reassured herself by saying maybe one of my friends came by and said, "Hey, let's go fishing." I have done that before. You only need to say the F word, and I was out with my tackle box and pole in hand. She looked around the house, called out my name a few times, and thought, well, he's not here. She didn't notice that my keys were still there and my cell phone was upstairs on the counter. By this time, surely it was dead anyway. She went back to the apartment expecting to hear from me at any moment. By the time 11 p.m. came, she was in full panic. She had called my best friend Craig, my other friends Mike and David. None of them talked to me that day. She called my coworkers. She called my family. No one has seen or heard from me. She had thought about calling the police, but in her mind, seeing those TV shows where they say an adult has to be missing for 48 hours before they will do a report stopped her. She did not sleep at all that night, staying by her phone, Googling for accidents near our home, nothing. Sunday, the following day. The next morning, she went back to the house. It was about 7 a.m. She looked around the house looking for any sign that I returned. She went out in the backyard, calling my name. She did walk downstairs, looked around, and came back up. I must have not heard her, as in my little dungeon I couldn't hear any noise. She went out to her car and sat in there crying. I, on the other hand, I felt like I was in an unending vigil. I did my best not to look over at the corpse on the chair. Over the night I had no sense of time, so I was up all night. I had began to pull down the old wood paneling around the room. This paneling was different. The other paneling inside the house was nailed on. This was glued on with some kind of adhesive. I soon realized why. As I pulled a section of it off, I noticed that the walls behind it were all cinder block. Great, I thought. I am trapped in a bomb shelter and no one knows where I am, or even if they could hear me. The fact that there were no window that allowed light or fresh air made the feeling more claustrophobic, and soon my focus went to that, and not so much the dead guy in the chair. I soon tried to calm myself by sitting behind the now mangled file cabinet. I was hiding my eyes from the corpse. I soon drifted off to sleep. Up above and outside, my wife decided to make a police report. She contacted our local police department. She didn't call 911 because she thought she would just start with a police report. She got on the line with dispatch and they asked her a ton of questions, such as my full name, was I on any medications, my make and model of car and license plate. She did snap at him, saying his car is right here in front of me. He is nowhere around. The police dispatch said that an officer would be there as soon as they were free. She waited about 30 minutes and a patrol car pulled up. My wife was in tears and her voice cracked that I was missing. They asked her a bunch of routine questions, asked about my mental health and physical health, and if I had any history of leaving before. She said my husband is not a runaway. The officers came and looked around the house a bit. They were the ones to find my cell phone and took it. I must have not heard them, as probably about that time I was asleep behind my green file cabinet fortress. The police did a look around the exterior of the property, gave Millie a report number, and drove off. At that time, our neighbor Joe and his wife walk over. They look like they've seen ghosts, Joe said to Millie. Your husband, is he okay? She looked at him with tears in her eyes and said no. He's missing. Joe's wife grabs his arm and looks at him. Millie looks at them and said, do you know anything? Please, if you do, please tell me. Joe start to ask her, did your husband tell you the story I told him about your house? Millie said, no. What story? Joe looks at his wife and says, why don't we come over to our house? We'll make a cup of tea. Millie said, I am waiting for my mom and sister to come. Joe said we can sit in our garage and watch out for them. Millie agrees. They walk over and Joe's wife goes inside her kitchen to make a pot of tea. Joe pulls out a chair for Millie and tells her, now what I am about to tell you happened so long ago. He relays the same story he told me. Just as he is about to finish, Joe's wife comes out with the tea set and sets it down. Oh, Joe, don't get her all up in a panic about that. For all we know, her husband is just out getting materials or something. Millie looks up and says, ever since we've been married, we have only been apart all night. When he went on a business trip, he always comes home. Joe looks over at the house and in a low voice just says, so odd, so odd. Millie's mother and sister come shortly afterwards and pick her up. Her sister drives Millie's car back to her mom's house and said, we'll call the police back when we get to the house. Millie's mom's house starts to be flooded with family members, friends, and people from church offering to go out searching for me. Later that night, Millie's mom give her an over-the-counter sleeping pill and she sleeps in her mom's bed. I suddenly awoke, almost startled. For some reason, I felt like the corpse had awoken me somehow. However, I woke up to my nightmare again. I had no idea what time it was. I started ripping wall paneling again and tried not to think about my increasing thirst. The more paneling I peel off, most of it coming off in very small sections, only reveals more cinder block behind it. Suddenly I hear footsteps above, not just one or two, but sounds like 4 to 5 guys. Could it be the police? I start to yell out, I'm in here. Suddenly I hear a loud radio playing and soon realize that it's the workers, and they were known to blast Spanish music all during their workday. I continued to yell out, pounding my fists on the walls. I'm in here. I'm trapped in the closet, over and over again. My delirium soon got the better of me and I fell on the ground laughing at I'm trapped in the closet. I start laughing. I'm like R. Kelly. My laughs soon start to go to tears. Millie is still at her mom's. No one notified the crews about what had happened. They were in the middle of ripping out the last bit of flooring and cabinets in the kitchen and replacing a section of drywall over where our sink was going to go. All that day, Millie and her mom drove around to different spots that in her mind I might be. She imagined that I went on a hike. Yeah, I am not the hiking type of guy, but she had to keep looking. Soon evening fell. They were back at Millie's mom's house, still surrounded by family and friends who were also out looking for me. One of them made up a missing poster. Of course, they used a picture of me that I hated, as it looked like I had a double chin. That evening, the crews were wrapping up for the day. I heard the music go off, and I suddenly jumped up and grabbed a reel from the projector and was hitting it on the ceiling, screaming with all my energy that I had left. Suddenly, I hear a knock back. I yell out, "Yes, I am here. Help me." I tried my best to remember what the word help was in Spanish, but I couldn't. Eventually, I had heard them yell from the other side of the wall. I screamed out loud, "Help me, I am trapped." Then I hear the footsteps run away. Oh man, did I scare them off. I can't last another night in here. I look over at the corpse in my mind. He is smiling at me, laughing at me. Suddenly, I hear footsteps run back and a loud saw. Yes, I thought, finally I am going to be saved. I hear tearing and the saw go on and off a few times. I yell out again, "Keep going, I am here." Finally, a plume of sawdust begins to pour out of the wall about 4 feet from the door that trapped me inside. They cut a hole about 2 feet by 2 feet, and the worker poked his head inside and said, "What you doing in here, mister?" I almost push him out of the way trying to crawl out. He said, "I can cut it bigger." I said, "No, I am getting out of here." I scrap up all along my ribs and stomach, but finally free. The other workers are all looking at me like, WTF is he doing? One offers me a Gatorade. I gulp it down in one drink. I asked him, "Can I use your phone so I can call my wife?" The phone rings 3 times and Millie answers it. "Honey, is that you?" I cry out and said, "Yes, it's me." She said, "Where are you?" I said, "I am at the house." She hangs up. Soon Millie, the police, paramedics, fire department, almost all our friends and family are all up and down my street. I started to throw up from trying to drink all the bottles of Gatorade the workers have. I get put on a gurney and they start an IV on me for my dehydration. I tell the police officer who comes to check on me. I motion for him to come close as I could barely speak anymore. I told him there is a dead body in that room. After I am released from the hospital, we decided to move from our apartment and move in with Millie's mom. We did end up finishing the renovation on that home, but we never moved in. In the end, it was just too creepy for us, especially for me. We put the house on the market and had to disclose about the death that occurred. We thought that we would lose money on the house, but in the end, an investor bought it and turned it into a rental, and we actually made almost $75,000 in profit. We did locate a family member and returned the coin collection to the family. In the end, they also finally got closure on their missing loved one. I sat in the dim light of my apartment staring blankly at the mess around me. Dishes piled high, clothes I hadn't bothered to pick up in weeks, and newspapers cluttered the floor like a layer of dust on my past. Everything about this place felt dead, as lifeless as I felt inside. It's been 10 years since my parents died, but some days it feels like it was just yesterday. Other days, like tonight, it feels like they've been gone forever. I stopped believing in anything after they passed. Faith, hope, God, none of it meant anything to me anymore. But old habits die hard. I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, hands clasped together like I used to when I was a kid, reciting half-remembered prayers. My words were hollow, slipping from my lips without meaning. I didn't believe anyone was listening. Why would they? I hadn't been to church in years and hadn't even thought about God in any real sense since I watched them lower my parents into the ground. But here I was, whispering prayers into the void, feeling stupid for even going through the motions. The silence in the room felt suffocating. I let out a heavy sigh and ran my hands through my hair, pushing it back as I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees. What was the point of all this? Every day felt like it bled into the next, an endless loop of nothingness. My friends had long since drifted away, and I couldn't blame them. I barely left the apartment anymore. Maybe they got tired of trying to pull me out of this pit when all I did was pull them in with me. It was in the middle of that silence, that heavy, crushing stillness, that I heard it. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a voice, soft but clear, cutting through the haze of my mind. I sat up straighter, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. "Jude," the voice said, smooth and comforting. "Jude, I've been watching you." I froze, my mind racing. Was I hearing things? The voice was calm, almost soothing, like it was speaking directly into my thoughts. "Who?" I whispered, my voice cracking from disuse. My heart thudded against my ribs, the pulse quickening as the voice continued. "I am God," it said simply, as if that explained everything. "And I have chosen you?" A cold shiver ran down my spine. God? That's ridiculous. I hadn't believed in God in a long time, but there was something about the way the voice spoke, something that made my skin prickle with fear and a strange sense of comfort. "You feel lost," it continued, as if reading my thoughts. "You've drifted far from your path, but I am here now. I want to help you find your way again." I didn't respond. What could I say to that? My brain told me this was crazy, that I was losing my mind, but there was a part of me, the part that had been drowning in loneliness and despair, that wanted to believe it was real. I wanted to believe that something had come to save me from myself. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring into the darkened corners of my apartment, waiting for something else to happen. My heart was still racing, but my body felt frozen, as if I couldn't move even if I wanted to. That voice kept echoing in my mind. "I am God." It was absurd, wasn't it? I wasn't some religious zealot or a man of faith anymore. But what else could it be? It wasn't like I'd had visitors recently, and it didn't sound like the kind of voice that came from a mind cracking under pressure. It was too calm. "I know you're afraid," the voice spoke again, softer this time, almost gentle. "But there's nothing to fear. I've come to help you, Jude." I swallowed hard, feeling the dryness in my throat. "Help me." My voice came out quieter than I intended. I didn't want to sound desperate, but I knew I did. I felt desperate. "Yes," the voice replied, as steady and comforting as before. "You've suffered long enough. I can see the weight you carry, the burden of your loss. Let me lift it for you. All I ask is to walk with you, to live through you, and to experience what it is to be human." Something about the way it said that last part made my skin crawl, but I brushed it off. I wasn't in the position to question help, no matter how strange it seemed. Living through me, experiencing humanity, that didn't sound so bad, did it? The Catholic teachings from my childhood floated to the surface of my mind, God moving through us, guiding our actions, helping us be better. Maybe that's what this was. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. If this was real, if it wasn't some kind of delusion, maybe this was my chance. My chance to make sense of everything that had happened, of everything I'd lost. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice a little stronger now. "Only what you've already been willing to give," the voice said, patient. "Your life, your experiences. I want to walk beside you, feel what you feel, and help you heal. In return, I will show you things you've never known. You'll find peace again." Peace, God, did I want that? The kind of peace that didn't feel like drowning in sorrow. The kind of peace that would let me sleep without waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for air with my heart pounding like I'd just been buried alive. I hesitated for only a moment longer before nodding, though I wasn't sure who I was nodding to. "Okay," I whispered. "If you're really God, and you can do what you say, I'll let you in." The second the words left my mouth, I felt something like a cool breeze slipping inside my chest, filling the hollow space that had been there for so long. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was strange, like I could feel the presence of someone else inside me. "Thank you," the voice said, quieter now but still soothing. "Together, we'll do great things." I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. The apartment seemed quieter now, still dark and cluttered, but there was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there before. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make me feel different. I stood up, shaky at first, but steadier than I'd been in weeks, maybe months. There was a new energy coursing through me, something alive and warm. It made me feel like I could take on anything. Maybe this was what faith felt like. Maybe I was finally finding my way back to something greater than myself. Now the voice spoke again, guiding me. "Let's begin." The days that followed were the brightest I'd had in years. The voice, soft and steady, kept me going, encouraging me to make small changes in my life. At first, it was simple things: cleaning up the apartment, tossing out the piles of trash I'd let build up for months. It was amazing how different it felt, how much lighter the air seemed once the place wasn't suffocating under the weight of clutter. The more I cleaned, the more I felt like I could breathe again. I started taking better care of myself, too. The voice, always calm and reassuring, nudged me to shower more often, to eat real food instead of living off frozen meals and takeout. The act of making a sandwich felt oddly fulfilling, as if I was reclaiming something I'd lost. For the first time in what felt like forever, I actually looked forward to the little things. It was as if the voice had flipped a switch inside me, lighting up the parts of me I'd buried in the darkness. "You're doing well," the voice would say, that comforting tone wrapping around me like a warm blanket. "This is the first step. You're on the right path." And I believed it. How could I not? My life was improving slowly but surely. I wasn't just sitting in that dingy apartment staring at the walls anymore. I was living again, The voice kept me focused, kept me grounded, and I found myself trusting it more with each passing day. But it wasn't just about cleaning and eating better. One morning, as I sipped on a cup of coffee I'd actually brewed myself instead of grabbing from the convenience store, the voice nudged me towards something bigger. "It's time to reconnect," it said, as if it knew exactly what was on my mind before I even thought it. "Your friends have been waiting for you. They miss you, Jude?" I stared at the cup in my hands, the steam swirling up in delicate patterns. My friends? I hadn't thought about them in a while, not really. Sure, I saw them maybe 5 times a year, but it was always awkward, like we were strangers who shared old memories, but nothing else. Over the years, I'd shut them out, unwilling to burden them with my misery. Yet the voice was right. They were still there waiting for me. Maybe now that I had God with me, things could be different. "They're important to your journey," the voice continued. "Reach out to them. Show them you're changing, that you're healing. They'll see it, and you'll help them too." There it was again, that idea of helping others. The thought didn't just sit with me, it bloomed inside my chest like a seed sprouting new life. Maybe I could help them. Maybe this wasn't just about me anymore. That afternoon, I sent out a few simple texts to the people I'd grown distant from. "Hey, it's been a while. Want to catch up sometime?" To my surprise, they responded enthusiastically. Within a few days, I was sitting at a small cafe, sipping coffee with old friends I hadn't seen in months. At first, the conversation was light and casual, what everyone had been up to and how work was going. But as the hours wore on, we slipped into more personal territory. It was Tom who brought it up first. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant, as he spoke about how he'd been struggling with anxiety, how it felt like the walls were closing in on him sometimes. I listened, nodding sympathetically, but I could feel the voice stirring in my mind. "He needs to confront his pain," the voice whispered, soft but insistent. "Push him. Make him face it head on." I hesitated. Tom's words were heavy, filled with uncertainty, and it didn't feel right to dig into that. But the voice, it sounded so sure, so certain that this was the way. I shifted in my seat, trying to figure out how to approach. I began carefully. Sometimes you have to face that stuff directly. I've been going through some things myself, and what's helped me is confronting it, really digging deep, even when it hurts. Tom blinked at me, surprised. His expression shifted. Was that discomfort? But I pressed on, the voice urging me forward. "Maybe you need to look at what's really causing it," I continued. "Stop avoiding it. Let it hurt for a while, and then you'll come out stronger." He didn't respond at first, just stared into his cup. The silence felt heavy between us, like the air itself had thickened. My heart started to race. Had I gone too far? Had I pushed too hard? But the voice was calm, unbothered. "You're helping him," it said, soothing me. "This is what he needs." Tom finally looked up, his eyes dark and stormy. Maybe he said quietly, but there was a tension in his voice, something fragile that I couldn't quite place. The rest of the conversation was more stilted after that. We talked a little longer, but the warmth from earlier was gone. I left the cafe feeling uneasy, as if something had shifted, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Still, the voice reassured me, telling me that this was how people grew through pain, through confrontation. I convinced myself that I was helping Tom, even if it didn't feel that way at the moment. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the familiar pain in my back returned. This time it was sharper and more intense than it had been before. I groaned, shifting uncomfortably as the ache spread from my shoulders down my spine. "Relax," the voice said, gentle but firm. "This is part of the process. It's how you grow." I clenched my teeth as the pain intensified, a burning sensation now radiating from my shoulder blades. It felt like something was pressing against my skin from the inside, trying to break free. But even as the discomfort grew, I found myself accepting it, welcoming it. The voice was right, pain was necessary. It was how we became stronger, how we grew. As the night wore on, the pain dulled into a throbbing ache, but I didn't fight it. I let it consume me, drifting into a restless sleep with the voice whispering softly in the back of my mind. "This is only the beginning." The next few days passed in a blur. My back still ached, but I pushed it to the back of my mind, focusing on the progress I was making. Things were good, or at least they seemed that way. I was reaching out to friends more, keeping the apartment clean and eating better. The voice kept guiding me, offering bits of advice that I followed without question. But Tom had been quiet since our last meeting. At first, I chalked it up to him needing time to process what I'd said, but after days of radio silence, a small seed of doubt began to grow in my mind. Had I gone too far? Had I pushed him when he wasn't ready? "You did the right thing," the voice reassured me. "He needs time, that's all. Growth comes through pain, Jude, you'll see."
I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. After all, the voice hadn't steered me wrong yet. My life was better because of it. So I pushed my doubts aside and focused on the next step in my journey, reaching out to Mark, another old friend I hadn't seen in months. We arranged to meet at a local bar, the kind of place we used to frequent back in the day before everything had fallen apart. When I walked in, Mark was already there, sitting at a corner table with a beer in hand. He smiled when he saw me, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation maybe, or was it just my imagination? "Jude," he said, standing up to greet me. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile as I shook his hand. "Too long." We made small talk for a while, catching up on the usual things: work, life, the weather. But the voice was there in the back of my mind, waiting. It felt like it was biding its time, waiting for the right moment to step in. And that moment came after Mark's second beer, when he leaned in a little closer, his voice lowering as he talked about his recent breakup. "It's been rough," he admitted, his eyes downcast. "I thought she was the one, you know, but things fell apart. It's my fault, mostly. I guess I've just got too much baggage. She couldn't deal with it anymore." The voice stirred, its presence stronger now. "He needs to face the truth," Jude, it whispered, insistent. "He's hiding from himself. Make him confront it." I hesitated again, just like I had with Tom. But the voice's pressure was stronger this time, more urgent. It pushed me, and before I could stop myself, the words were spilling out. "You know, maybe she left because you weren't dealing with your own problems," I said, my tone sharper than I'd intended. "Maybe she saw the cracks and realized you were never going to fix them." Mark blinked, his expression shifting from sadness to confusion. "What?" "You've got to face it, Mark," I continued, the voice pushing me forward. "You can't just blame it on her leaving. If you want to move on, you've got to face your own shit. Stop hiding behind the breakup like it's all on her. You're the problem, and until you deal with that, no one's ever going to stick around." There was a long silence after that. Mark stared at me, his face tightening, a mix of shock and anger flashing across his features. I could feel my heart racing and the blood pounding in my ears. Had I gone too far again? Had I pushed him like I had with Tom? But the voice kept whispering, reassuring me. "This is for his own good, Jude. You're helping him grow. Pain leads to understanding." I didn't mean it like that," Mark stammered, his voice shaky. I don't know. Maybe you're right, but..." His words trailed off, and he looked away, his jaw clenched. I knew I'd hit a nerve, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt something else, a sense of satisfaction. The voice was right. This was how people grew, by facing their pain head-on. The rest of the night was awkward. We didn't talk much after that. We just exchanged a few strained words before Mark made an excuse to leave early. I watched him walk out of the bar, the weight of the moment pressing down on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done the right thing. I sat there alone for a while, sipping my beer and replaying the conversation in my head. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that I had helped him, just like I'd helped Tom. It didn't matter that they both seemed uncomfortable, even hurt by my words. Growth was painful. That's what the voice kept telling me, and I believed it. As I walked home that night, the pain in my back flared up again, sharper this time. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, wincing as the burning sensation spread across my shoulders. It felt like something was moving beneath my skin, pushing against it, trying to break free. I stumbled, clutching at my back as the pain intensified, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Breathe," Jude, the voice whispered, calm and patient. "This is part of your transformation. You're becoming something more. Embrace the pain." I stood there, hunched over in the cold night air, gritting my teeth as the agony ripped through me. But I didn't fight it. I couldn't. If this was what it took to fulfill my purpose, to help others grow, then I would endure it. I would let the pain shape me, just like the voice had promised. After what felt like an eternity, the pain dulled, leaving a throbbing ache in its wake. I straightened up slowly, my body trembling, and continued walking home. By the time I reached my apartment, I was drenched in sweat, my legs barely able to carry me to my bed. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the voice hummed softly in my mind, soothing me, calming me. "You're on the right path," it said. "Soon you'll understand everything. This is just the beginning." I closed my eyes, my body still aching, but I felt something else now, something deeper. A sense of purpose, of destiny. Whatever was happening to me, I was ready for it. I texted Mark again, asking if he wanted to meet up. The first few texts went unanswered, but I kept pushing. After what happened last time, I understood why he might not be too eager to see me. I told him I wanted to apologize and that I just wanted to talk things through and make things right. After a long wait, he finally agreed. We planned to meet at my apartment this time. Something about the isolation of it felt right. The voice told me it was better this way, no distractions, no interruptions. We could really get into what was holding him back, and I could help him grow. The day came and Mark showed up looking uneasy, fidgeting with his jacket zipper as he stood in my doorway. I tried to smile, to put him at ease, but there was a nervous energy between us that made my skin prickle. Still, I invited him in, and he hesitantly stepped over the threshold. The apartment was clean now, almost unrecognizable compared to the mess it had been before. Mark glanced around, visibly surprised at the change. "You've been busy," he commented, his voice strained with forced casualness. "Yeah, I've been making some changes," I said, keeping my tone light. "Trying to improve, just like I want to help you do." Mark's eyes flickered with something worry, maybe, but he nodded and sat down on the couch. I could see how tense he was, the way his shoulders were hunched forward as if he was bracing himself for something. We made small talk for a bit, just like we did at the bar last time, but I wasn't interested in the surface-level stuff anymore. The voice was there, whispering in the back of my mind, urging me forward. It was time to help Mark break through his walls. "You've been struggling," I said, cutting off the light conversation. "Since the breakup. I know you're trying to move on, but you haven't really faced the real problem, have you?" Mark stiffened. His eyes darkened, his lips pressing together into a thin line. I don't want to get into all that again, Jude," he muttered. "Not like last time." But the voice pushed harder, louder now, drowning out any second thoughts I might had. "He needs to feel it, Jude. He needs to suffer if he's ever going to grow." I leaned forward, my hands clasped together as I stared at him, my gaze unwavering. "You're never going to get past this if you keep running from it," I said, my voice firm. "You need to face the pain, Mark. You need to feel it, deep down, or you'll never heal." Mark shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the door. I don't think this is a good idea." Before he could move, before he could stand up to leave, the voice gave a final command. "Show him. Make him feel it." My hand shot out and grabbed his arm, gripping it tightly. Mark froze, his eyes widening in shock. "Jude, what are you doing?" "You need to feel it," I repeated, my voice steady but my grip tightening. "This is the only way. You can't keep running from the pain." I twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees as he yelped in pain. My heart raced, but the voice was there, soothing me, telling me this was right. This was how I was supposed to help him. "Jude, stop," Mark gasped, struggling against me, but I held him firm, pushing him down harder. His body twisted under the pressure, his breath coming in ragged gasps as I forced him to the ground. The voice was relentless now, filling my mind with its commands. Make him suffer. Only then will he understand. My free hand reached for his throat, pressing down as his eyes filled with terror. His hands clawed at my wrists, trying to pry me off, but I didn't let go. I pressed harder, feeling his pulse quicken beneath my fingers. "This is for your own good," I whispered, my voice trembling with some twisted form of reassurance. "You'll thank me for this." Mark's face twisted in agony, his body writhing as he struggled to breathe. His gasps turned into choked sobs, and I felt something inside me shift, something dark and violent taking root. The voice hummed in satisfaction, feeding on the pain I was inflicting. And then, suddenly, it wasn't just Mark who was suffering. A sharp, searing pain erupted in my back, so intense that I staggered, releasing him. My hands flew to my shoulders as the pain spread, tearing through me like a wildfire. I collapsed to my knees, gasping as the burning sensation reached its peak. Mark scrambled away, coughing and choking as he stumbled to his feet. I barely noticed him flee, my mind consumed by the agony ripping through my body. I could feel something moving beneath my skin, pushing, stretching, breaking free. The pain became unbearable, and I screamed, my voice raw and animalistic. My shoulders were on fire, my flesh tearing as something sharp began to poke through the skin. Blood soaked through my shirt, and I ripped it off, desperate to see what was happening. My back was a mess of torn skin and blood, but beneath the gore, I saw them two jagged, bony spikes protruding from my shoulder blades. They were growing, pushing their way out of me with sickening cracks and pops, stretching upward like twisted, blood-soaked wings. The pain was unimaginable, but through it all, I felt elated. The voice was there, soothing me, telling me that this was my transformation, my reward for doing God's work. "You're becoming something more," it whispered. "This is your destiny. Embrace it." I collapsed onto the floor, my body trembling, blood pooling beneath me. My vision blurred, the edges of the room darkening as I fought to stay conscious. But even as the darkness closed in, I couldn't help but smile. I had done it. I had helped Mark, just like I was meant to. And now, I was becoming something greater, something divine. As I slipped into unconsciousness, the last thing I heard was the voice, calm and reassuring. "You've done well, Jude. You're almost ready."
The voice had grown louder and more demanding over the past few days. It wasn't satisfied with the small acts of pain I'd inflicted. I'd pushed Mark and Tom, I'd made them suffer, but it wasn't enough. The voice told me they were only steps on a path, a necessary part of my transformation, but there was more, something bigger, something I wasn't yet ready to see. That night, the voice called to me with a new urgency. "Now is the time," Jude had whispered, its tone colder than before. "You've prepared yourself for this moment. You must bring suffering to the world. Only then will you truly become what I need you to be." I didn't question it. How could I? Everything the voice had told me up to this point had been right. I had seen the changes in myself, the transformation happening before my eyes, before my soul. The spikes in my back were proof that I was becoming something more than human. The pain, the agony I endured, it was all part of the process. But this time, the voice wasn't asking for words or emotional suffering. This time it wanted something real, something irreversible. "Go out tonight," it commanded. "Find someone. A soul that needs to feel my presence. Bring them pain, Jude. Bring them to me." I didn't ask why. I didn't hesitate. I simply did as I was told. I left my apartment without a second thought, the cool night air hitting my skin as I stepped into the darkness. The city was quieter than usual. Empty streets stretched before me, illuminated by pale streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I felt a strange sense of calm as I walked, as if I knew exactly what I needed to do. The voice guided me, tugging at my mind, pulling me toward the quiet alleys and back streets. I walked for what felt like hours, my body moving on autopilot, until I saw her. She was standing by herself, waiting at a bus stop. A middle-aged woman dressed in a dark coat, looking down at her phone. She was alone, vulnerable. "This is her," Jude, the voice said, its presence now overpowering. "She's the one. Her soul is ready. You must help her. Bring her pain. Bring her closer to me." I felt my heart racing, not with fear, but with anticipation. My hands twitched as I approached her, my footsteps barely making a sound on the cracked sidewalk. She didn't notice me until I was right behind her. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady, almost friendly. She turned around, startled. I could see the confusion on her face as she took a step back, her eyes flicking to the empty street around us. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "You need to feel this," I whispered, taking a step closer. Her face contorted with fear, and she tried to back away, but I was faster. My hands reached out and grabbed her throat, squeezing tight before she could even scream. The shock in her eyes quickly turned to panic as she clawed at my arms, struggling to pull free. "Shaysh," I whispered, tightening my grip. "This is for you. You need to feel the pain. It's the only way to get closer to him." Her gasps filled the air, her body thrashing as she tried to fight me off, but I held her down, pressing her into the ground, the cold pavement beneath us. My grip tightened even more, my fingers digging into her skin as her struggles became weaker, her eyes wide with terror. I felt no remorse, no guilt. This was the right thing to do. She needed this. I was giving her a gift. Her body stopped moving after a while, the last breath escaping her lips in a faint, broken sound. I held on for a moment longer, waiting until the life drained from her eyes. When I finally let go, her body fell limp against the pavement. I stood there, breathing heavily, my hands trembling as I looked down at her lifeless form. A strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. The voice had been right. This was necessary. I had done what was asked of me, and now I would finally receive my reward. And then the pain hit. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. A burning, searing agony exploded in my back, sharper than the spikes that had emerged before. I screamed, my body convulsing as I fell to my knees beside her corpse. My hands clawed at my back, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. The pain grew worse, spreading from my shoulders down to my spine as if my entire body was being torn apart from the inside. And then I felt something large, heavy, and wet pushing through the torn skin of my back. The spikes, the ones that had been there for days, began to stretch and grow, tearing through the flesh with a sickening crack. Blood poured from the wounds, staining the pavement beneath me as the spikes unfurled. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat as I felt them grow long, jagged, blood-soaked wings erupting from my back. They spread wide, casting dark shadows in the dim light of the street lamp, each movement sending waves of pain through my body. I could feel the blood dripping down my sides, pooling beneath me as the wings twitched and flexed, heavy and sharp. But through all the pain I felt alive. I looked up at the sky, my body trembling as I knelt in the pool of blood, her lifeless body beside me. The wings beat once, twice, heavy and strong, sending gusts of air around me. "You've done it," the voice said, soft but triumphant. "You've brought her to me. You've embraced your destiny, Jude. This is what you were meant to become." The pain was unbearable, but it didn't matter. I had become something more, something divine. I had fulfilled my purpose. The wings, though grotesque and soaked in blood, felt like the final piece of my transformation. I had killed for God, and in return He had given me this. As I knelt there, the blood still seeping from my wounds, I felt a strange peace settle over me. This was what I was meant to do. This was who I was meant to be. I woke up in the hospital, strapped to machines, barely able to move. At first I thought it was a dream, one of those nightmares where you can't scream, can't even open your eyes. But it wasn't a dream. This was real. I couldn't move, couldn't feel anything from the neck down. They told me I had been found in the middle of the street, covered in blood, barely alive. The police thought I was the victim of some random attack. They said it was a miracle I'd survived at all. The woman I killed, they said she hadn't been so lucky. They told me they'd found her body next to mine, beaten, strangled. But they never suspected me. Not once. They said someone must have attacked us both, that I'd somehow made it out alive while she didn't. It's strange. You'd think I'd feel relieved that I wasn't caught. But all I could feel was devastation. I had failed him. My wings were gone. When I came to that hospital bed, paralyzed and broken, there was nothing left. No evidence of the transformation I had undergone. No proof of the divine being I was becoming. I had blacked out after my wings emerged, and now they were gone as if they had never been there at all. And that is what haunts me the most. I didn't get to finish the work. I didn't get to bring the world closer to Him, to help them understand the beauty of suffering, the purity of pain. When I lost consciousness, I must have disappointed Him. I failed God at the moment when He needed me most. Now I lie here in this bed day after day, paralyzed, bedridden, useless. They gave me this device to help me communicate and to speak my thoughts aloud so I could share my story. But what good is it now? What good am I now? Still, even in this broken body, I feel something, a kind of peace. Yes, I failed Him in the end, but I was chosen. I was chosen to let Him experience life through me, and for that I am grateful. Every moment of pain, every act of suffering I brought into this world, it wasn't for nothing. I allowed God to live through me to feel what it means to be human. That was His wish, and I gave it to Him. Even if I couldn't see it through to the end, I did what He asked of me. I let Him feel. I lie here now, knowing I won't ever walk again. I won't ever leave this bed. But I still feel blessed. I was his vessel. I carried out his will, even if I didn't finish it. No one knows what really happened that night. They think I'm a survivor, some poor soul who barely escaped with his life. But that's not true. I wasn't the victim. I was chosen. I was his instrument. And I will never forget that. I close my eyes, and sometimes I can still feel the wings, the weight of them, the blood dripping from the tips. In those moments I smile. I may have disappointed him, but I let him live through me. I gave him what he wanted. And that's enough. Things have gotten weird really fast. And after everything I've seen, I'm questioning reality. I definitely need therapy. This might be my last entry, but just know I'm safe for now. I'm a few days behind where I left off. Evelyn's coming by tonight. But I can't stop thinking. What the fuck did it mean by mother? What was it? Why did it smell like that? How long had it been watching me? And why the hell did it piss on me? All these questions raced through my mind as I sat with my back to the cabinet door, barricading it with my body. I was chain-smoking cigarettes and shaking uncontrollably. The creature's eye, its eye was human. But the body? No fucking way. The voice? It was so familiar, like I'd heard it before. Its face. It looked familiar. Should I call Shane? How would that convo go? Hey man, so I need every cent I paid you back. You never mentioned an ungodly creature in the walls, and I think I'm moving. Yeah, that would go well. The writing on the picture told me everything I needed to know. Don't. What a cheap goddamn warning. At this point in a horror movie, the protagonist would usually run and come back later, but I've already smoked about 10 cigarettes sitting here, and the adrenaline had almost subsided. I thought about asking Evelyn to crawl through the hole when she came by. She always was nosy, and if she didn't come back out, well. 2 birds, right? I laughed darkly to myself at the thought. Maybe I really was losing it. But then I figured, fuck it. I'm going to see just what the hell is in my apartment's walls. And I'm killing it. Not my best idea, but yeah, no, alcohol. I stood up, still jittery, and walked over to the nightstand by my bed. The picture of Evelyn stared back at me, her once loving expression now almost mocking. I opened the drawer and pulled out my dad's old .357. I checked the cylinder, just 1 bullet. Same as I left it. I often contemplated taking my own life, but suicide, much like the amount of bullets in the gun to me, was simply not enough. I loaded the rest of the chambers. Armed and barely sane, I walked back to the kitchen, staring at the cabinet that concealed the door. My heart pounded. This was it. I opened the cabinet door and peered into the black. Nothing, no sounds, no creature, just that rancid smell thick in the air. It clung to the walls like rot. Grabbing my grinder and the chain, I got back to work. The metal screeched as I cut through the last bit of the chain link. It snapped with a dull clink, and the door creaked open, sliding through something wet. The smell hit me even harder, like a punch to the gut. Shit, honest to God, the floor behind the door was caked in shit. I said a prayer to God knows who and asked myself, am I a plumber or a welder? Why am I about to climb through shit? My questions went unanswered. I dropped down on my hands and knees and crawled through the door and into the filth, the fecal matter smooshing under my palms and knees and oozing a liquid that seeped into both like clay mud. The space was cramped, the walls close, and decorated with childish drawings, rainbows, and clouds, all crudely sketched on the walls, stained by grime, like a nightmare version of a kid's playroom. Toys were scattered around, half buried in filth. Some visibly chewed on. I felt a lump rise in my throat. What kind of fucked up room was this? What the hell was it for? Then the smell, it was overpowering. The thick, acrid stench burned my nose and throat, and my stomach started to churn. Before I could stop myself, I was vomiting hard. The mess splattered onto the floor, adding another layer of foulness to the room. I tried to pull myself away, but the space was too tight. I ended up crawling through it through my own vomit. The sticky, acidic bile soaked into my sleeves and shirt, clinging to me like moths to a lantern. My hands were trembling, but I kept crawling forward, shining my flashlight into the darkness. As I moved, something caught the beam, something across the room. A small box. It was covered in grime, but there was a faint gleam like it hadn't been touched in years. I pivoted my torso towards it and shifted my legs, then began the crawl. As I approached, I got up on my knees with my head tilted downward to avoid hitting my head. I wiped the dirt off and opened the box. Inside were old, yellowed, and filthy photographs, pictures of Shane as a kid. I recognized him immediately, his height towering in each. Each photo was dated, labeled by year, with names scrawled in shaky handwriting. Shane Christmas 1977, Shane Easter 1976, Shane Mother's Day 1978. I flipped through more photos, pictures of Shane's mother. Her name was written on the back of one, Evelyn 1980. My stomach twisted. Me Jesus fucking Christ, that's why. Before I could make sense of that, my heart sank further as I found something else, pictures of the creature. It was dressed exactly like Shane in those childhood photos, mimicking the same outfits, but its face. It was melted, distorted, like a bad imitation of Shane. Then I saw a photo of both of them together. Shane and Simon Christmas 1977. Simon, his brother. My blood ran cold as I flipped through more pictures, seeing images of my apartment before it was my apartment, when it was their home. The door, brightly colored. The room like a child's nursery. The creature, or Simon. Shane's mother hugging both Shane and Simon. The way a mother hugs her babies. I wanted to throw up again. This poor thing. He's been locked away in here for years. Why? Why would Shane lock his brother away? Where was Simon now? Why isn't he in his room? And then I looked around the room. I saw it, and it hit me. There was an air vent, the vent. A 3-foot by 3-foot air vent directly across the room from the door. That's how he's been getting around. No fucking way was I crawling through that. But again, I thought of Evelyn. She was small enough, maybe she could. I inched closer to the vent and saw a light from around the corner. But before I could react, I heard it. A soft, wet shuffle. From the darkness, I saw him, Farrell, crawling silently toward me. Simon. His body twisted and deformed. A misshapen head sloped off by his right ear, his eyes misaligned, one facing forward, the other on the side of his head like a nightmare version of a Picasso painting. His skull was fused to his left shoulder, a grotesque hunch connected to a vascular arm, while his right arm dangled uselessly, ending in 3 malformed fingers. He had no neck, and his pale skin clung to his ribs, sickly thin. His torso ended and met with only one malformed foot. He was naked, covered in filth, and crawling toward me with a growl that sent chills down my spine. "Mother," he snarled. "Where ... mother?" His face looked like Shane's and his voice sounded like Shane's, but it was shrunk, like a child's. I panicked. My hand slipped on the slick floor as I scrambled to back up, my knees catching on toys and debris. I could barely move in the cramped space, and the more I struggled, the closer he got. His breath was hot and rancid, like decay, and his growling grew louder, more desperate. I kicked out, trying to push myself through the door, my hands clawing at the floor, slick with filth and vomit. I could hear him behind me, gaining on me, the soft slap of his malformed hand against the floor. I threw myself backward, my heart pounding, my body trembling with fear and adrenaline. I was halfway out, almost there, when I felt something grip my ankle, a cold, strong hand. I kicked hard, my foot connecting with something soft. I felt a jerk that pulled me inward. Then the sharp pain of something biting at my leg. I kicked again, and then I was free, crawling back into the kitchen, slamming the cabinet door shut behind me. I sat there, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, filth, and fear. Then I heard what could only be described as a child's soft cries. Simon was still in there, and I had no idea what he was going to do next. I peered at my leg. The bastard bit down to the fat on my right leg just above my Achilles. I was bleeding like a stuck pig and sweating like a whore in church. Then I heard the sounds of Simon moving back through the vent, still crying. Bring ... mother, I've never cried that hard in my life. Not out of fear, but sorrow. Guilt. What kind of fucked up person lets their disabled brother rot away behind a door? How has he survived? What the fuck did he do to their mother? I opened the junk drawer to the left and grabbed my bag of zip ties and some gauze. First I zip-tied the cabinet shut, then I took a shot. Then I took a shot. Then I poured some whiskey on the bite, covered it in gauze, and wrapped it in electrician's tape, the dad way. After I threw out my clothes, I took a shower, packed a bag of clothes and beer, and went down to my truck. I drove around for about 4 hours. Mostly in circles. I never left town. I found myself at the Motel 6 by the truck stop, and I checked in. I've been here for about 5 days. I still don't know what to do, who to call, who would believe me. Evelyn, fuck, why would I have wrapped her into this? Why did I? Why God? I called her, acting like I was reminding her of the box she left, but it didn't take long for her to see through the facade. Me. Hey, I'm surprised you answered me. Evelyn, I figured you were drunk and I was bored. Thought it might be funny to hear you beg me to come back again. Me, yeah, well, I'm not. I paused to take a breath. Me, your dumbass left a box at my house and I just wanted to see if you'd pick it up. She was quiet for a while, then said, Evelyn, liar. Your voice is awfully shaky. What's wrong? What happened? Me, nothing. Evelyn J., don't fucking lie to me. What's wrong? Me, you were right about the door. The silence was back and ringing in my ears a lot louder than before. Me, I'm in a lot of danger. Evelyn, what do you? Me, Shane's brother is behind the door, EV. My words must have landed pretty harshly. Evelyn, what? Me, Shane's had his fucking brother locked up under my sink. Evelyn, why? How? I went into full detail. I told her everything I saw, how Shane left a warning, the lock, the chain, the filth, the room, the pictures, the cries of Simon. I could hear her gasp at a lot of the things I told her. She told me that she wanted to help me, but was terrified of the thought of crawling around in shit. Can't say I'd blame her. I figured I sounded fucking crazy. She told me she'd call me in a few days and try to wrap her head around it all. She finally did. Once this mess is over, I might post again. Maybe I'll die and save everyone the headache. But as of right now, sitting in this motel, I'm fucking terrified. If Shane finds me, I'm a dead man. The boys' sleepover had the kind of wild energy that only middle school kids could muster, laughing so hard your stomach hurt, pillow fights that left feathers in your hair, and ghost stories that weren't scary until the lights went out. I'd rolled into my sleeping bag sometime after midnight, my face glowing with the soft blue light of my phone screen as I mindlessly scrolled through dumb memes and TikToks. The clock was ticking by unnoticed. Until it wasn't. 3:33 a.m. I don't know why the sight of those numbers, those 3 goddamn numbers, made my skin prickle. But they did. Something about the stillness of that moment made the world feel off, like the air was different, heavier, colder. A weight settled over the room, pressing down on my chest. I glanced around. The laughter and chaos from earlier had evaporated, leaving behind the shallow breathing of my friends in their sleeping bags, the occasional twitch of someone caught in a dream. But the darkness, it had teeth now. I swear it did. The shadows were longer, thicker, like they were something more than just the absence of light. And then I heard it. A slow, grating creak. The kind that made your bones feel cold. My gaze snapped to the closet door across the room. It wasn't shut all the way, I knew that, but now it was opening. Just a crack, slowly, as if someone or something was gently pushing it, testing the air. My breath caught in my throat. I waited, frozen, hoping it was just a draft. Yeah, right, the kind of explanation adults give to brush off the thing you know you saw. But they refused to believe in. No draft opened doors this slow, this deliberate. Another creak. The door inched open a little more, showing nothing but pitch-black darkness behind it. I stared, my heart doing a jittery dance in my chest, the kind where each beat feels like it might be the last before something terrible happens. I should have looked away. Hell, I wanted to look away. But I couldn't. It was like that door had latched onto my brain, holding me captive. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but all I did was watch, paralyzed as the darkness inside the closet began to shift. Then it appeared a hand, Thin, grotesque, with skin like stretched leather over brittle bones and nails so long and cracked they scraped the wooden floor. I tried to swallow, but my throat had closed up. All I could do was stare as the thing stepped out of the closet. A figure. It was human-shaped, but barely. Black hair hung in tangled clumps over its face, covering everything except the faint gleam of its eyes. They glittered in the shadows, like they could see straight through me. The rest of it was shrouded in darkness, except for those filthy nails that clicked as it moved toward me. I wanted to scream, to wake up my friends, to do something. But the words were stuck, strangled in my chest. My mom, I needed her. I needed her to tell me everything was going to be okay, that it was just a bad dream. But I knew better. I knew it wasn't. Before I could blink, it lunged at me fast, impossibly fast. Those nails found me, dug into my skin with a sickening, wet rip. I felt the pain before I saw the blood, and then I was screaming so loud I thought my throat would tear. And then I woke up. Just like that. One moment that thing was clawing into me, pulling me into the blackness, and the next I was awake. The room was the same, but the light had shifted. The early hours of dawn hadn't come, not yet. My heart was racing, beating so fast it hurt. My skin was clammy, my sleeping bag soaked with cold sweat. I sat up, trying to get a grip, trying to convince myself it had been just a dream, a nasty nightmare conjured up by too many ghost stories and too little sleep. I wiped my hands on my shirt, shaking. That's when I saw it. 3:33 a.m. Those numbers on my phone screen again. I stared at them for what felt like forever, my breath coming in shaky gasps. My brain kept telling me it was just a coincidence. That's all. Nothing supernatural about a digital clock showing the same time twice in one night. But something was wrong. I was wrong. I turned my head, dreading what I might see, knowing deep down that whatever had come from the closet in my dream wasn't gone. It was here, and it was real. I forced my eyes toward the closet, praying the door would be shut. But it wasn't. It was open. Wide open. And from inside, something moved. Something was waiting. Then I heard it again, the creak. The slow, deliberate groan of the closet door creeping open, all over again. This is going to sound insane, but I'm so sick of keeping it to myself. I was witness to something of a homicide, and very few people know what truly happened that night. If you ask me, the government is purposely preventing it from spreading worldwide because it sort of involves supernatural. Very obviously so, to the point it would probably create mass panic, so big details were hidden, and it has very little, next to none, news coverage. I've honestly been afraid that if I speak out, I'll go missing, if you catch my drift. But I'm tired of staying silent about this. It's like a huge weight on my chest. I don't care about sounding crazy anymore. This experience has ruined my life. I startle at my own shadow, every creak of an old building, and I've developed a severe panic disorder and a case of PTSD. Maybe if I speak about it, it'll offer me a form of closure. Well, make yourself comfortable, and I don't know, maybe grab a snack and a drink, because this is going to be a bit of a doozy. My name is Grace. I'm currently 30 years old, and this happened when I was 16. My friends and I had been planning to explore this abandoned, supposedly haunted house for about a week. It was October, and we were feeling pretty festive. Halloween Eve fell on a Saturday, and we already had plans to go to a Halloween party the following Sunday. So we decided that would be the day we would go ghost hunting in the infamous Eye Ripper house. I know, it certainly sounds like a fun time, doesn't it? I would have never gone if my best friend Yasmine hadn't peer-pressured me into it. You see, I was a dorky chick with brown hair and big glasses, a late bloomer who kept her nose stuck in books, and was always regarded as the teacher's pet. I wasn't exactly the daring type. When I moved to town, I had virtually no friends, until Yasmine came and sat next to me at lunch out of the blue one day. She had light brown skin and long, curly, dark brown hair. I remember she called me pretty, said I looked like one of those girls in movies or ghosts, even though they were just as pretty when the glasses were still on. I blushed and said thank you, not used to being complimented, and then she just kept talking up a storm. No matter how short and bland my responses were, she carried the conversation nonstop. That's how we became friends. She almost sort of adopted me like a pet and dragged me everywhere with her. Others who didn't like me were forced to get along with me in her presence, and I was invited to a lot more parties. The thing about Yasmine was, while on the outside she seemed like a cliché popular cheerleader all the boys drooled over, she was an absolute geek for the paranormal. She ran a vlog where she talked about ghost stories, folklore, and then tried to commune with spirits on her bedroom floor via a Ouija board. Her parents didn't know, of course, and she kept it a secret generally from our classmates. But a week before the incident, she had complained about her viewers pressuring her for more risky content. They wanted her to explore abandoned and haunted places like other content creators did. And while she didn't have a lot of subscribers, they were very loud and demanding and threatened to leave her with none if she didn't follow their suggestions. She had drawn them in with her personality, and now she had to keep them hooked by spicing things up a bit. The only people she told about this aside from me were her other friends, John, Zach, Bryce, and Vanessa. Well, Bryce was her boyfriend. He was on the football team with John, and they were inseparable and among the kids who were popular because they were cute-looking, athletic, and outspoken. Vanessa was a relatively new friend. She was kind of a lot to take in, and no one really liked her. But Yaz had adopted her the same way she had done for me, so I have no room to talk. Zach was sort of a social reject, and everyone believed John became friends with him out of pity, mostly because they couldn't believe John, the quarterback heartthrob, actually had an interest in Dungeons and Dragons, which they had apparently bonded over. Yasmin had broken down the plan to us while we were in her house after school one afternoon, watching a movie on her couch with her parents at work. "So you know the house those kids were killed in some years back?" Yasmine spoke with a mischievous grin. "Oh God," I said with a groan. "You mean that freaky-ass house where those kids were found with their eyes ripped out?" "That house," John asked incredulously. To describe John, he was tall with dark brown skin and short black hair. He often wore his bright red varsity jacket. "Oh yeah," Vanessa pitched in with a sick grin of excitement. "Sign me up for that." Baby, she was a true crime fanatic, to an annoying extent, at least in my opinion. She almost seemed to fangirl over serial killer cases as if she were gushing about celebrity drama. She was pale from powdery foundation with blonde hair dyed black at the tips, and mascara always ringed her gray eyes. "Well, count me the fuck out," Bryce said, through a mouthful of popcorn as he dug his hand greedily into the bowl we were sharing. He had sandy blonde hair with blue eyes and really liked wearing hoodies most days, even in the summer. "Bye, Abby," Yasmine whined as she wrapped her arms around him. "Are you really going to let me explore some abandoned house all by myself with no big strong jock to protect me?" "Yas, why the hell would you want to go there?" I asked, rubbing my temples stressfully. "I told you," she rolled her eyes. "Ghost hunting and spooky. Abandoned places is what's hot with paranormal vlogs nowadays." "You have a ghost hunting vlog?" Zach, who hadn't spoken in a while from his secluded spot in the armchair in the corner, suddenly piped up. He was skinny and naturally pale with shaggy black hair and thin-framed glasses. He always seemed to wear band tees and skinny jeans, and he barely talked outside of his circle of video game nerds at school. "I do now," she smiled at him. "Come on, you guys. This Saturday, Halloween Eve, don't be pushies. It'll be so fun. Oh, and pack your sleeping bags. We're going to be spending the night." "Hell no, we all," except for Vanessa and Zach, shouted in unison. "Come on, what's the worst that can happen?" Yasmine seemed to be getting frustrated at our refusal. "Casper jumps out at you and goes boo? There's 6 of us. It won't be that scary with such a big group." "I'm in," Vanessa said. "But what are we supposed to tell our parents?" "Tell them you're all at my place," Zach said, smirking deviously. "My dad works the graveyard shift, and my brother will cover for us if anyone calls. There won't be any trouble." "Don't tell anyone where we're going," Yasmine snapped. "I'm serious, not one soul. I don't want this getting out to people at school. My mom would snap my neck if word got out and she found out I was doing this." Zach raised his hands up defensively. "I'll tell my brother we're going to a party. Chill." "Wait, so you're actually doing this?" Bryce asked, finally turning his attention away from the movie. "Yes, I'm serious. I want to catch some creepy paranormal shit on camera." Yasmine gave him a hard stare. "You're out of your mind." John shook his head and laughed. After he was through mutilating them, he took a knife and gouged their eyes out while they were still alive. Yasmine continued as I bent down to pick up the phone. The others huddled close around her while I lingered in a junky corner. Then, oddly enough, he wrote a letter confessing to his crimes and hanged himself in this very room. But before he did, he gouged his own eyes out. One of the most bizarre things about this case. Did he feel guilty? Did he want to feel what his victims felt? I turned the phone over in my hands. It wasn't as old as most of the other things in the house. In fact, it seemed quite new aside from the dust and cracks. I tried to turn it on, but of course an image of an empty battery flashed on screen. "He probably would have never been caught if it weren't for him snitching on himself," Vanessa said with an air of annoyance, as if she was actually upset he'd gotten caught. "The bastard deserved to rot in jail for what he did," John growled. his fist balled in the pockets of his varsity jacket. I have a little sister and I can't imagine someone snatching her up like that and doing all these terrible things to her. He took the easy way out. I believe that's the hook where the noose hung. Yasmine pointed to a hook instilled in the ceiling. And the kids' bodies were found in the wall and under the floor, which is why those floorboards are loose there. She pointed to a section of the floor that seemed to jut up slightly. I hated to imagine a kid's lifeless body lying under there, so I quickly looked away. You must have researched this case, too, Vanessa replied, catching footage of everything the other girl pointed at. Well, Yasmine rolled her eyes. Gotta do your research before you ghost hunt. I've known this case for longer than any of you, so any questions anyone has, I can answer them. Yaz isn't the only one who does her homework around here. Vanessa almost sounded jealous that Yasmine was also knowledgeable on the case, but I had no idea why that could be. Hey guys, look at this. Everyone's attention turned to me and I held the phone up. Didn't this case happen in the 90s? Before touchscreen? Why is someone's phone here? Vanessa came closer to me with the camera, filming the phone. Ooh, what do we have here? Clearly someone was in here before John said. We should have known we wouldn't be the first to try this. The screen still works, it's just dead, so I wonder why they didn't take it with them. I bent down and picked up the half-empty pack of cigarettes. And look, who smokes half a pack and just leaves it? Admittedly, I was a teen smoker. Yasmine had gotten me into it, so I knew all about savoring every last sweet stick of tobacco until they were gone, especially as a broke high schooler. Give those here. Bryce snatched the cigarettes from me and immediately lit one up with a lighter from his jeans pocket. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes at him. Yasmine had gotten the habit from him. Guys, who cares about all that? Yasmine sighed. Let's set up the Ouija. We sat with our legs crossed around the Ouija board, watching as Yasmine lit 4 red candles and placed them at each corner. We placed our hands on top of one another, touching the planchette simultaneously. Vanessa had set up the camera on a nearby box to film us. Okay, Yasmine took a deep breath. Can the ghosts of Sarah Miller, Peter Bouchard, William Crawford, and Millie Jenkins hear us? We waited in tense silence. John and Bryce seemed bored, with John staring into space and Bryce chewing gum. Vanessa was very immersed and waited with bated breath, same as Zach. I felt that nothing was going to happen. After all, I didn't believe in ghosts. All those videos on the internet were staged. Today's technology was advanced enough to fake such things, and I had never had an experience myself. Is anyone there? Yasmine asked again impatiently. Anyone at all? Give us a sign. The candle flames went out in perfect unison. We jumped, startled, but managed to keep our hands on the planchette. Thankfully, we had at least 2 of our flashlights lying on the floor pointing at us as an extra source of illumination for the camera. That was a breeze or something, Bryce assured himself more than anyone else. Yeah, was all John could say. In the basement, Vanessa squeaked. They went out at the same time. Zach marveled. You're so easily entertained, Bryce scoffed, prompting John to give him a warning elbow jab in his side. Oh my God, I caught that on camera, Yasmine gushed. We caught it on camera, Vanessa corrected her. Ask something else. Who are you? Yasmine asked. Slowly, the planchette moved under our hands. We all broke into disbelieving laughter and jeers. Oh, stop shitting me. That's got to be one of you, Bryce laughed. Yeah, someone's moving it, I agreed. Yes, R. Yasmine muttered, as our eyes followed the planchette. H. Okay, which one of you goofs spelled Sarah? Zach asked, giving us each an accusing glare. It seemed he didn't find it as funny as us. Wasn't me, I said. You said that pretty quick. Bryce raised an eyebrow at me. It was definitely you. No, it wasn't, I snapped. You're the one accusing people right off the bat. Maybe it was you. Ooh, and she's defensive. Vanessa snickered. She's definitely guilty. Yasmine defended me just as I opened my mouth to retort. Hey guys, if she said she didn't do it, then she didn't do it. Then who did? Zach asked coldly. I believe our little ghost friend Sarah Miller did it. Yasmine smiled. Isn't that right, Sarah? Give us a yes or a no. The planchette slid over to the word yes at the corner of the board, and this time, rather than laughing, we all scoffed and snorted, our amusement waning into irritation. "This is getting old," I said. "I'm sure it'll be great for your little channel, though." Yasmine frowned at my tone. It came out much ruder than I intended. I couldn't help it. I was starting to get super tense in this situation. I regretted even coming. Everything about the house from the moment we crossed the threshold felt wrong. The feeling worsened the longer we stayed. "Okay, Sarah, tell us why you're still here." Yasmine resumed her interrogation of the spirit as we all shifted restlessly in our spots on the dirty floor. The planchette, quicker this time, moved to spell out another word. Looking, I was the first to piece it together. Looking for what Vanessa asked, looking at the air all around us, it seemed she had started to believe the ghost was real. "Sarah, what are you looking for?" I'm supposed to be asking the quest." Yasmine cut herself off with a gasp as the planchette furiously zipped from letter to letter across the board. My hand nearly slipped off, it went so fast. I tried to feel who was moving it, but it wasn't possible. Our hands all seemed to be limply riding the triangular piece of wood. The planchette spelled out a 4-letter word. "Eyes," John said in confusion. "Eyes." Zach looked beyond unsettled. "It said eyes." It did. "Whoever's doing that could at least be clever." Bryce rolled his eyes. "Eyes? Seriously? At least be original." Zach's breathing became shallow as the planchette started moving again, without anyone asking any questions. Zach jumped up from the Ouija board, and his hand removing from the planchette made it cease all movement. "Hey, it stopped when he got up. That means it was him." Bryce pointed at the shivering and sweaty boy. "No, it stopped because you're not supposed to let go until you end the game properly," Yasmine admonished. "Stop blaming Zach," John warned. Zach shook his head and ran upstairs without another word. Vanessa giggled. "Where is he going?" "Oh, you guys are seriously fucking this up," Yasmine complained. I turned to her. "Are you serious? You're the one who begged us to come out here." "Right," John backed me up. "You got your footage, now let's get the hell out of this creepy basement." Okay, geez." Yasmine stood up, and we all followed suit. "Let's go set up our sleeping bags, you big babies." I trailed at the back of the group as we ascended the basement stairs, casting a nervous glance over my shoulder at the darkness. For a split second, I swear I saw a shadow shift, and I shone my flashlight at the wall where I thought I'd seen it. Nothing looked out of the ordinary, but that didn't stop me from hurrying up the stairs. It had to be my imagination. There was no way I saw the faint silhouette of a small body moving deeper into the darkness. We decided to camp in the living room. This way, if we all decided to hightail it to the car, the front door was not far away. We pushed the old-fashioned looking sofas against the wall and scooted the cobweb coffee table out of the way, making space in the center of the wooden floor. Zach, not saying a word to anybody, quickly unrolled his sleeping bag, slipped inside, and tried to go to sleep. The rest of us, however, were wide awake, and since it felt better to be out of that basement, we were all chatting and laughing as Vanessa filmed us. Look at us spending Halloween Eve in a creepy haunted house. Yasmine stared each one of us in the eyes with an approving grin that made my heart feel warm. We're such badasses. We're different from other kids that probably looked around for 5 minutes and dipped. We're staying the night. We got balls of steel. Everyone except Zach agreed wholeheartedly with smiles of pride on their faces, including me. I had to confess it felt good to be praised by Yasmine, and I did indeed feel cool for daring to do such a thing. Also, I had kept the smartphone I found with me, and currently had it plugged up to a fully charged, portable power bank I brought in case my own phone ran out of battery. There was a good chance I wouldn't be able to get in because of a passcode, but I wanted to try anyway. "Did you get anything on your recorder?" Vanessa asked, poking him. "I didn't check," Zach grumbled. "Let me sleep." "Give it here," she urged. He all but tossed the audio recorder at her, and she grabbed it and plugged in the headphones. "Let me see the camera," I said, feeling bold. "I want to see if you caught my good side." She tossed the camera to me. I ended the current recording and started to review the footage. I shot her a glare as she snickered and muttered a sarcastic response about my good side, or lack thereof to be specific. I'd never done anything to Vanessa, but she always liked antagonizing me. "Babe, did you write any notes down?" Yasmine asked Bryce. He was half listening as he lit up another cigarette. "Give the notepad here." Yasmine sighed as she realized he'd simply scribbled a game of tic-tac-toe on the paper. "Whatever." Several minutes of quiet discussion passed, then Vanessa gasped, attracting everyone's attention. "Hold up. I think Zach actually caught something." Zach raised himself up, alarmed. We gathered around as she replayed the part of interest. It was when we had just figured out the planchette spelled the word eyes. Everyone's voice echoed to us. Eyes, John's voice uttered from the recorder. A rushed out, slightly garbled whisper sounded out right after, and then Zach's voice. Eyes, it said eyes, it did. Wait, can you rewind it and slow it down, I asked. Vanessa nodded and pressed a couple of buttons. Eyes, can I have them? Nem. Eyes, it said eyes. It did. It said, can I have them? John leapt backwards and pointed at the recorder. I've what Yasmine wondered, frowning. Our eyes, Zach's voice, even toned like the calm before the storm, had everyone's gaze on his clammy face. It's asking for our eyes. It sounded like something else, Bryce shouted. It didn't say that. It sounded clear to me, Vanessa muttered, staring down at the recorder. There was a beat of silence as we all processed this. Grace ... anything on the footage, Yasmine asked finally, and everyone's eyes fell on me. I scrambled to replay the most recent video of our time in the basement, and everyone crowded around me to watch over my shoulder. Everything seemed normal until the candle flames went out and something in the far right corner of the frame moved in the darkness. The fuck is that? Zach cried. Rewind it, Vanessa commanded, then pause. I did, and when I paused at just the right moment, we all squinted and made out a thin, pale arm. In the process of slipping back into the shadows away from the reach of the flashlight beam, it was as if some person with milky white skin had quickly and silently stepped out of frame. We all looked at each other. Let's get the hell out of here, I whispered. That launched everyone into action. We rolled up our bags and ensured we had everything we needed. Vanessa insisted on carrying the camera and filming, rather than placing it back in the duffel bag, and we were all too concerned with leaving to care. We rushed out to John's car, John already having the keys jingling in his hand. We threw our shit in the trunk and piled into the seats, packed like sardines. Breathing heavily and anxiously peering out the windows at the dark night, we waited for John to start the car. He twisted the key, and the engine spurred to life with a deep purr like some majestic beast came to save us from this nightmare. Then it sputtered back out. John tried again and again and again. It sounded like the engine wouldn't turn over. The fuck? Didn't you say you got this piece of shit checked out? Bryce hollered. Yeah, I did, John shouted back. It was working just fine on the way here. Oh God, I muttered, sitting in the middle seat and looking up at the house through the windshield. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was standing in the upstairs window ... watching us. A young boy with skin whiter than the moon and his eyes covered in shadow to the point they looked like they were completely black. My mouth fell open and my heart skipped a beat. You okay? Yasmine tapped me, a look of concern on her face. I looked at her, then looked back. The boy was gone. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, but after what we experienced so far, I knew that wasn't true. I just want to go, I whimpered. Looks like we're not going anywhere, Vanessa boredly replied, looking out the window with her cheek resting in her palm. I wondered how she could be so calm, but maybe it was a facade. She wouldn't lose her shit. Zach buried his face in his hands silently as John banged his fist angrily against the steering wheel. Bryce ran his fingers stressfully through his hair, and Yasmine chewed her manicured fingernails into jagged bits. Finally, after endless attempts at starting the car, John defeatedly leaned his head against the steering wheel. Look, I know it sucks, but we can still walk. I broke the silence, putting my hand on his shoulder. Bryce looked at me from the passenger side seat. Walk all the way back. That'll take an hour or two? What choice do we have? I hissed. I'm calling my brother. Zach took his phone out of his pants pocket and opened his calling app. He can pick us up? Perfect. Bryce slumped down in his seat, relieved. He'll totally give a shit for being here, but fuck it, Zach nodded as he pressed the call button over his brother's contact. He might even think I'm pranking him, so I'm going to put it on speaker so you guys can verify my story. The phone rang as we allowed the tension to ooze out of our bodies, anticipating our rescue. It stopped ringing and subtle breathing could be heard from the speakers. Hey man, we need some help, Zach began. The bad man stole our eyes, the eerie voice of a child whispered, and we all froze like deer in headlights as we heard it. The bad man stole our eyes and now we can't leave. Please help us. Zach started to hyperventilate as he dropped the phone at his feet. Vanessa looked panicked as she desperately told him, your brother's just playing a prank. Tell him to come get us. Zach shook his head vigorously, his breathing getting more and more out of control. What the fuck was that? Bryce muttered, frozen in his seat. Zach, calm down, Jesus. Yasmine rubbed his arm. I'm calling my mom, I quickly said, taking out my own phone and dialing her number, making sure to put it on speaker. She'll be pissed, but it's better than waiting out here another moment. The phone rang and rang until finally the soothing voice of the woman who gave birth to me answered. Hello, my mom said, making everyone in the car let out a breath they likely didn't know they were holding. Mom, please come get us. We're on 52 Magnolia Way at that creepy abandoned house, I begged. I'm coming right away, my mom replied hastily. Just tell the children to wait for me. Okay, I wait, children? You mean Yaz and the gang, I asked? No, the children. I want to be there when they rip your eyes from your sockets, you filthy diseased bitch, my mom's voice screeched, crescendoing into an unrecognizable, unearthly howl, before the call suddenly dropped. What the hell type of drug is your mom on? John stared at me with wide eyes. That wasn't my mom. I gaped at the screen as I held my phone with trembling hands. Then I noticed something in the top right corner of the screen. A symbol caught my eye. 3 empty bars. No signal? There's no fucking bars, I cried, tears spilling down my cheeks. We don't even have a signal. They all scrambled to check their own phones, and the blue glow of their screens illuminated their horrified expressions. "So... Who did you call?" Yasmine said slowly. "The spirits are toying with us," Vanessa replied gravely, turning the camera towards Yasmine. "Isn't it obvious they want us to help them move on?" "You're still recording?" Yasmine glared at her. "So what?" Vanessa shrugged. "Might as well. We're going to want a record of all this when we get out of here. Not like I'm hurting anyone." "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." Zach started rocking back and forth. "Fuck it." We walked. Then Bryce burst out the car. "Hey, wait up, man," John called after him as he left from his seat, too. Everyone else except Zach left the car to join Bryce, who was speed walking down the street. "We have to stick together." Yasmine angrily stormed up to him and impeded his path, pushing at his chest. "You're just going to dip out like that without even making sure I'm with you." "You have legs." Bryce walked around her. "Wait, we can't leave." Zach. John stopped in his tracks as he remembered his new friend. "Why isn't that loser following us anyways?" Bryce shot back. "Don't call him that." John shoved Bryce and went back to the car. When Bryce saw that Vanessa, Yasmine, and I were going to wait for them, he groaned loudly and let his hands fall limp at his sides. He didn't want to go on his own, but he didn't want to wait up either, it seemed. I watched, biting my thumbnail, as John opened the back seat door and leaned in. We could hear him talking to Zach. "Come on, man, we gotta go. Do you really want to stay here?" Bryce rolled his eyes. Vanessa pointed the camera at the scene and narrated. "John is convincing Zach to leave with us. Even though if he were in his right mind, he'd do that anyway." "Cut it out." Yasmine pushed at the camera. "This isn't a movie." "Hey, be easy with her," Bryce scolded. Yasmine looked shocked at him. "Hey, it's her camera. If she wants to break it by knocking it out my hand, it's no skin off my ass," Vanessa spat, turning the lens to Yasmine, who appeared to be fuming. Finally, Zach clambered out of the car and briskly and wordlessly walked past us, John following after him. Finally, Bryce took the lead, and we all began walking down the road, which forked into 3 different roads, with the middle one being the way we came, until we were flanked on both sides by trees. "How long until we get there?" I asked. "Like I said, probably an hour or so, but that's just getting back into town," Bryce answered from ahead of me. "Is there a bus that runs this late?" Yasmine asked. "I think so," John replied. "We can catch it back to my house, and I'll try and use my dad's car to drop while off at home. Hopefully he won't notice. Hopefully." We seemed to walk endlessly in silence at that. Not just your regular silence, but dead silence. There were no owls hooting, no crickets or cicadas singing. Even the cool breeze that had shaken the leaves earlier was gone. It was just the sound of our clothes rustling and our footsteps hitting the pavement. I looked around us. The trees were like dark sentinels silently observing the road. We pointed our flashlights ahead, walking single file at the side of the road. "Maybe we'll pass a car and we can hitch a ride back," I suggested, just to break the silence. "If said car can seat all 6 of us, I don't see why not." Yasmine shrugged. "Does anyone notice how ... quiet it is?" Vanessa asked. "Shut up," Zach told her without even looking at her. Some time passed in silence, and my bony legs felt just about ready to give out. "We've been walking for fucking ages. I know for a fact we should have been there by now." Bryce howled in frustration, stopping and looking ahead. "Wait, there's something up there," I said, squinting my eyes at the faint silhouette of distant buildings looming in the darkness. "Oh God," Zach covered his face. "No, I mean there's buildings." Bryce was right, and it didn't take too long at all. I squealed with excitement as I burst into a sprint. "Wait up," John said, as the others soon followed suit, breaking into a run themselves to keep up with me. Our flashlight beams bounced wildly. Yasmine held my hand as we ran and smiled at me. I smiled back. We were both elated to be getting home, as far as possible from the dreaded Eye Ripper house. Except that's not what happened. It's not what happened at all. We slowed down as we got closer to the buildings, a pit of dread opening up in our stomachs as we slowly realized. "Wait," I said, gasping for breath. Is that?" Bryce asked, panting. "Oh, fuck," Vanessa cried. When we got close enough for our flashlight beams to reach the place, it dawned on us that the buildings were the abandoned houses of that unfinished suburb, including the one we had just run from. We walked in a straight line for nearly 2 hours and came back to 52 Magnolia Way. We all fought with each other to get up the stairs first, clambering and shoving and stampeding towards the door and away from that horrible banshee caterwaul the entity below was releasing. Zack tried to claw his way past me, and I shouldered him aside, our actions driven by pure and primal fear. He stumbled and fell down the stairs, and my mind in its state of fight or flight didn't register this immediately. Once we were in the kitchen, we turned towards the basement door as Zack's screams of terror spilled out from the darkness. Zack John yelled, running for the stairs. Bryce held him back. "We need to go." "Go where?" Yasmine cried, spinning in a circle. "We're trapped." Zack's screams were suddenly cut off very abruptly, and we all froze up for a single petrified moment. "Anywhere but here," I blurted before turning and dashing out the kitchen, down the hallway, and through the front door. I could hear the others following me. I had no plan, but as soon as I saw the neighboring vacant house to the right, I beelined straight for it. Thank God it was unlocked, too, and also deserted while being fully furnished, like the tenants had left in a hurry, and the layout of the floor plan was identical. We threw ourselves through the front door and fled into the living room. John immediately rushed to lock everything and cover the windows with the curtains. Yasmine curled up in a corner behind an armchair recliner and rocked back and forth, her face soaked with her tears. Bryce looked about ready to cry himself, but he somehow held himself back as he furiously paced the floor and muttered to himself. Vanessa sat herself down on the sofa, camera still held in her hand as if it were glued to it, and pathetically filmed us as she shook like a leaf. "What the fuck was that?" I murmured as I slowly slid my back down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. I had managed to grab my flashlight on the way out the basement, and it seemed John and I were the only ones that remembered to. "A spirit," Vanessa replied, her voice completely hollow. "We should have never come." "I'm going to make sure nothing's in here." John grabbed an old, dusty walking cane that was leaning against the wall as a weapon and left the living room. "You can't hurt a spirit that way," Vanessa called after him. He ignored her. She got up and traipsed over to Yasmine, crouching and putting the camera in her face. "So Yazzie, confession cam time. What do you have to say for yourself now that you know you're going to be the reason for our deaths?" Yasmine said nothing, staring into space and swaying back and forth. "Come on," Bryce weakly protested. "Hey," I snapped. "Leave her alone. You wanted to come just as much as her. In fact, you were the first person to agree to going." "Don't even get me started on you." Vanessa spun around and shoved the camera in my face. "Next, I know you pushed Zack. You two were behind everyone, but I know he didn't just accidentally fall down the stairs. You should fess up to your sins before you die." I felt sick to my stomach. How did she know if she was ahead of us? Did she look back at the wrong second? "Listen, he was shoving me, too," I argued, afraid that I was going to be ostracized for this fatal mistake. Vanessa threw her head back and laughed. "Oh my God, dude, I was just shitting you. I didn't know you actually did it. Wow, you're like a murderer." "Shut up," I pushed her, and she fell back on her ass, but she simply stared up at me through the camera lens with a taunting smile. "Guys, this is really not the time for a cat fight." Bryce stepped between us, giving me a warning glare. Suddenly, we were startled by a pounding on the door. We all leapt to our feet, our caveman instincts ready to take over at the sign of danger again, but a familiar voice bled through the door. "Hey, let me in," Zack pleaded, banging the door some more. "Hurry up, before they notice." I ran to unlock the front door and threw it open to the sight of Zack, sweaty and breathing hard, his glasses missing. He rushed past me and I quickly closed and locked the door, but not before catching a glimpse of the outside. It was void of life on the street, thankfully, as I had half expected to see either of the creepy ghost children again. Zack stood in the center of the room, bent over with his hands on his knees and panting heavily. John came from upstairs just then. He seemed shocked like the rest of us. "You're alive." "Barely," Zack said. "You were screaming so much," Yasmine said. "We thought for sure that thing back there had gotten you." Bryce nodded. We all looked at Zack as if we were beholding a miracle. It chased me, but I got away. Zach walked over to the corner and turned his head towards the ceiling. Thank Christ I got away. That was the most terrifying moment of my entire life. We need to figure out where to go from here, I said, pushing my glasses up my nose. Well, apologizing clearly didn't fucking work, Yasmine grumbled. Let's think about what we know about them, I mused. They were brutally murdered by a psycho, and they want their eyes back. Oh yes, let's magically conjure up a set of working eyes for each of them, Vanessa retorted. You know, another crazy thing about this case is that their eyes were never found, Yasmine said slowly. Some people say that maybe he ate them or just disposed of them, but no one knows. Not even his own eyes were found. Yeah, because more creepy stories is exactly what we need right now, Bryce quipped. What if Yasmine seemed to brainstorm, slowly pacing the room? ... What if the eyes are still here? John squinted at her. Sometimes ghosts haunt people to get them to find their remains, Yasmine explained. What if their eyes were actually in that house all this time, but the police just never found them? I mean, he hid their bodies in the walls. He could have hid their eyes, too. We all stared at her. I shook my head. Yasmine, that's an insane theory. They said they're looking for their eyes, Yasmine replied indignantly. That doesn't mean they're still around, and if they are, they're probably rotted into dust by now, Bryce scoffed. I think it's worth a shot, John said. He noticed the look we gave him. Listen, I don't know about you guys, but I don't enjoy being trapped with a bunch of little demons, so I'm willing to try just about everything to get out of here, even if it means looking for rotted, dusty old eyes. Or we could sacrifice someone. We all stared at Zach. Up until then, he has been standing awkwardly against the corner of the wall, listening to us since he last spoke. He stared back stoically, and I realized he was dead serious. Come again, Vanessa raised an eyebrow. They want our eyes, so we should pick someone to sacrifice and give them that person's eyes, Zach said as he stepped forward slowly. Then they'll be satisfied and leave us alone. I think that person should be Yasmine since she led you all here. He's definitely going nuts, Bryce cautiously kept an eye on Zach, protectively putting an arm over Vanessa and making her back away from him. Meanwhile, Yasmine confronted the skinny boy. Oh yeah? You think that's funny? Yasmine pushed him back against the wall. Who do you think you are? You're only hanging with us anyways because John felt bad for you. Get back in your place before I put you there, asshole. You have pretty eyes. Zach seemed unfazed and stared unblinkingly at Yasmine. In fact, I didn't remember seeing him blink much at all. Was he really losing his sanity? Babe, do you hear this jerk? Yasmine looked to Bryce for help and frowned as she saw he was just letting Vanessa cower behind him and not making a move to stand up for her. The hell? You just gonna let him talk to me like that? Listen, I don't think you guys should start a fight, Bryce meekly said. Zach, what's gotten into you? John asked earnestly, appearing genuinely concerned. Now's not the time for your weird sense of humor, man. Suddenly there was a rustling of a bush coming from outside where dead shrubbery lined the exterior walls. I held a finger to my lips to signal them all to be quiet, creeping over to the window. I discreetly peeked through the smallest crack in the curtains and saw a little girl, this time blonde with a blood-stained pink shirt and white shorts, crouching in the bushes with her face in her hands as if she were crying, but no sound came out. She was eerily still with flesh white as snow. I slowly backed away and gestured for everyone to go upstairs. They followed me up and I closed us inside a bedroom and drew the curtains over the single window in there. The room was furnished with a big bed, a vanity dresser, and a nightstand with a closet door in the corner. It was obvious by the decoration that everything was from a different era. We're just more isolated in here, Vanessa complained. I feel better closed up in here than down there, I replied, glancing quickly at my exhausted face in the vanity mirror. What was it? Yasmine asked nervously. The Jenkins girl again. No, it was a different little girl. I swallowed a lump in my throat. She was blonde and had on a pink shirt and shorts. She was just sitting there curled up with her face in her hands like she was either crying or playing hide and seek. I could see everyone's faces fall in fear, except for Zach's. He seemed absolutely emotionless all of a sudden, but he had been the most dramatic out of all of us so far, so maybe he had tired himself out. That sounds like Sarah, Vanessa whispered, turning the camera to me. That was the outfit she went missing, and leave it to a die-hard true crime fan like Vanessa to remember even the smallest details about a homicide case she was obsessed with. Soullessness hurts, Zach quietly spoke, his voice void of emotion or any inflection. We all turned to him, and there was a beat of silence. He was facing towards the wall, away from us, just blankly staring at the flowery wallpaper that was peeling and faded with age. I frowned and took a step back. Something didn't feel right about him. His presence felt off. Compared to before, he didn't feel like the same person anymore. "What's his deal?" Bryce asked John, gesturing to him. "He's just traumatized," John defended him, walking towards him. "You all right, Zach?" I know what happened in the basement was he grabbed Zach's arm and suddenly let go with a jolt of surprise going through his body, as if he had touched a hot stovetop. "What?" Vanessa asked. "He's ice cold, man." John shook his head, bewildered as he looked at his own fingertips, like he's been in a freezer. "I think you should lie down." Zach let John ease him onto the queen-sized canopy bed like those princess beds with the curtains I dreamed of having when I was 10. Zach laid down on his back with his blank gaze fixed upward, not saying a word more and not making eye contact with any of us. "Look, I think we need to go through with my plan." Yasmin brought all our attention back to her. "Zach's clearly in shock. We have to get him out of here." "For once, I agree," Vanessa sighed. "We have to do something." "This is crazy." Bryce shook his head. "I'm not going back to that house." "Then stay," John replied harshly. "Look after Zach. Does everyone still have their walkies?" I patted the walkie still attached to my belt loop, hovering over my jeans. Yasmin nodded after checking to see that her walkie was still clipped to the breast pocket of her pink sweat jacket. Bryce took his walkie out his jeans pocket, and Vanessa took hers out the pouch of Bryce's hoodie, which she was still wearing. John had his in his belt loop as well. "Great, since phones don't work, maybe we can communicate that way." John lifted the walkie to his mouth. Testing, testing." "Ish," I shushed him as his voice filtered through our walkies. "So are we doing this or what?" "Let's go around back so that thing doesn't see us," Yasmin suggested. We all agreed, and she turned to Bryce and hugged him tightly in case it would be the last embrace they ever had. He awkwardly patted her back. She went to give him a kiss, but he turned his face away. "What's wrong?" "Look around us. Everything is wrong." Bryce didn't look at her. Whatever, Yasmin stormed towards the door, trying to hide the hurt of rejection on her face. "Look after Zach and tell us if you need help. John, Grace, Vanessa, come on." Little did we know how much worse things would get from that point on. I watched him and prayed inside my mind for the God my mom always preached about to save us from this nightmare. Then I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and an unwanted presence dangerously close to me. I turned around in a flash, a gasp ripping out my throat as I shined my flashlight on the pale, eyeless, and dead face of Millie Jenkins. Every horrifying detail inches away from me on the step under the one I was standing on, the way her eyes were like the deepest holes, like she had nothing but a void back there, no flesh or anything. The bit of blood rimming her eyelids, the way her mouth was pressed into a tight line, like corpses whose mouths were sewn shut at the morgue. The others turned to look, and the stairway was filled with the chorus of everyone's mortified screams. I could hear the door creak and their feet shuffling as they all fearfully pressed themselves against the basement door to be away from the entity. I, on the other hand, couldn't seem to break eye contact from those two bone-chilling hollows, twin abysses staring back at me. I could somehow feel her terrible aura which shrouded her. It felt like despair and rage and longing radiating off her form like heat from an oven. Then her arm was suddenly outstretched towards me. I didn't see the gradual movement of the limb. It switched positions in the blink of an eye. Her hand was out, palm up. Feeling as though I were on autopilot, I dropped the sachet into her palm with shaking hands and recoiled. Finally, the ghost of Millie Jenkins, as if a puppet pulled away on invisible strings, floated backwards, swallowed into the cavernous darkness behind her. I felt her presence leave. It was like a dozen weighted blankets being lifted from my chest. John tried the door again, and it opened. We rushed out into the kitchen, breathless and weak in the knees. I felt like I could barely stand. You did it." Vanessa stared at me, impressed. You gave that creepy little bitch back her eyes. Dude, Yasmin reprimanded her. What? Vanessa whined. It's not like she can hear me clearly. She moved on. 1 down, 3 to go. We need to get back. Right now, John reminded us as he hastily ran for the back door. We followed behind him and retraced our steps to the second house's back door. If that little blonde girl Sarah was still at the front, we did not want to be noticed by her, not without having her eyes at least. As soon as we were inside, we ran straight for that bedroom upstairs where we left the two, not caring how much noise we made. When John opened the door and we all filed in, it felt like my heart would explode in my chest from the anticipation. But the sight we got wasn't what we expected. Bryce and Zach were standing there looking back at us, completely fine it seemed. Sure, their stances were rigid and their eyes wide with an unwavering gaze like a scared animal, but they seemed relatively unharmed. John sighed and crumpled in relief, rubbing his face. Dude, what happened? Yasmin asked. Me and Zach played a lame joke, Bryce said disinterestedly. Sorry, Zach said, not even cracking his usual annoying smile. That's not fucking funny, Vanessa yelled at him. We thought something bad was happening. The two didn't react. They simply stood and stared and stared and stared. John seemed to find it as weird as I did. Are y'all good? John asked, skeptical. You're being all weird. Well, anyways. Yasmin impatiently said before they could answer. Grace, like a complete badass, gave one of the ghost kids back their eyes and they ascended or some shit. I was right, we just need to find where that sicko hid their eyes. He kept Millie's in this little bag and hid it in her toy bear like a creep. We waited for their reaction, but got none. So I began awkwardly. Zach, are you feeling better? Yeah, Zach said flatly. I wonder if the other eyes are in the basement, too, Yasmin said, turning to me and ignoring the two boys. We didn't have time to check because of their unfunny little prank. We should go back. Let's go outside, Bryce said, his voice sounding weirdly hollow like Zach's. Vanessa, you come with me. Yasmin, you go with Zach. Where are we going? Vanessa raised an eyebrow. I turned around in a flash, a gasp ripping out my throat as I shined my flashlight on the pale, eyeless, and dead face of Millie Jenkins. Every horrifying detail inches away from me on the step under the one I was standing on. The way her eyes were like the deepest holes. Like she had nothing but a void back there, no flesh or anything. The bit of blood rimming her eyelids. The way her mouth was pressed into a tight line like corpses whose mouths were sewn shut at the morgue. The others turned to look, and the stairway was filled with the chorus of everyone's mortified screams. I could hear the door creak and their feet shuffling as they all fearfully pressed themselves against the basement door to be away from the entity. I, on the other hand, couldn't seem to break eye contact from those two bone-chilling hollows, twin abysses staring back at me. I could somehow feel her terrible aura which shrouded her. It felt like despair and rage and longing radiating off her form like heat from an oven. Then her arm was suddenly outstretched towards me. I didn't see the gradual movement of the limb. It switched positions in the blink of an eye. Her hand was out, palm up. Feeling as though I were on autopilot, I dropped the sachet into her palm with shaking hands and recoiled. Finally, the ghost of Millie Jenkins, as if a puppet pulled away on invisible strings, floated backward, swallowed into the cavernous darkness behind her. I felt her presence leave. It was like a dozen weighted blankets being lifted from my chest. John tried the door again and it opened. We rushed out into the kitchen, breathless and weak in the knees. I felt like I could barely stand. You did it, Vanessa stared at me impressed. You gave that creepy little bitch back her eyes. Dude, Yasmin reprimanded her. What? Vanessa whined. It's not like she can hear me clearly. She moved on. 1 down, 3 to go. We need to get back. Right now, John reminded us as he hastily ran for the back door. We followed behind him and retraced our steps to the second house's back door. If that little blonde girl Sarah was still at the front, we did not want to be noticed by her, not without having her eyes at least. As soon as we were inside, we ran straight for that bedroom upstairs where we left the two, not caring how much noise we made. When John opened the door and we all filed in, it felt like my heart would explode in my chest from the anticipation. But the sight we got wasn't what we expected. Bryce and Zach were standing there looking back at us, completely fine, it seemed. Sure, their stances were rigid and their eyes wide with an unwavering gaze like a scared animal, but they seemed relatively unharmed. John sighed and crumpled in relief, rubbing his face. "Dude, what happened?" Yasmine asked. "Me and Zach played a lame joke," Bryce said disinterestedly. "Sorry," Zach said, not even cracking his usual annoying smile. "That's not fucking funny," Vanessa yelled at him. "We thought something bad was happening." The two didn't react. They simply stood and stared and stared and stared. John seemed to find it as weird as I did. "Are why all good?" John asked, skeptical. "You're being all weird." "Well, anyways," Yasmine impatiently said before they could answer. Grace, like a complete badass, gave one of the ghost kids back their eyes and they like ascended or some shit. "I was right, we just need to find where that sicko hid their eyes. He kept Millie's in this little bag and hid it in her toy bear like a creep." We waited for their reaction, but got none. So I began awkwardly. "Zach, are you feeling better?" "Yeah," Zach said flatly. "I wonder if the other eyes are in the basement too," Yasmine said, turning to me and ignoring the two boys we didn't have time to check because of their unfunny little prank. "We should go back." "Let's go outside," Bryce said, his voice sounding weirdly hollow like Zach's. "Vanessa, you come with me. Yasmine, you go with Zach." "Where are we going?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, and why is she going with you and not me?" Yasmine's voice was rife with suspicion and jealousy. "I know where to find some eyes," Bryce replied simply. "Me too," said Zach with the smallest of nods. "We should go quickly." "Oh, wait a sec," John said as Zach and Bryce stiffly walked out the bedroom door into the upstairs hallway. "We just got back from outside. Can we just catch our breaths for a moment?" "No," Bryce said without turning around, leading Zach downstairs. We watched them befuddled in the hall. Something was very, very wrong. I turned to Vanessa, John, and Yasmine with a hard look on my face. "I don't trust this," I whispered. "Follow my lead, okay?" "It's my boyfriend," Yasmine started. "I don't care," I held a hand up. "If I'm wrong, but at least let me find out." I quickly went down the stairs before they could stop me. Bryce and Zach had already made it to the front door and were looking at me expectantly. "Where are our friends?" Zach asked robotically. "They're coming. Let's go outside and wait for them," I said, opening the door. No sooner than their shoes hit the pavement of the cement walkway, I slammed and locked the door. "Grace," Bryce stoically said on the other side. "Grace," Zach echoed him like a lifeless parrot. Then a slow thudding against the door. Knock, knock, knock. Too patient, eerily calm. Vanessa, John, and Yasmine watched from the top of the stairs. I looked back at them, my eyes haunted. If they were acting normally, they'd be swearing at me and screaming to be let back in. "So what's wrong with them?" A fresh wave of tears fell from Yasmine's eyes. "I don't know," I admitted. "Please, let's just go back upstairs and think for a while." I ascended the steps, not wanting to dwell on the hopelessness of our situation for at least one blissfully ignorant moment. "But what if those things hurt them?" John argued as I brushed past him. I stopped. "I don't think that's them anymore," I replied without looking back, and then entered the room again. Yasmine instantly started to weep bitterly, darting down the hall and slamming herself into a separate bedroom. Vanessa made no sound as she recorded John and I, standing there with our expressions crestfallen. John shoved the camera lens away from his direction as he moved past Vanessa and went into the other bedroom by himself in the opposite direction. His door slammed too, making me flinch. I looked at Vanessa. She looked back at me through the camera, not saying a word. I went deeper into the room and asked, "Are you coming in or not?" Vanessa wordlessly followed me inside and gently shut the door, still holding the camcorder up to her eyes. I sat on the bed and gave her the dirtiest stare I could muster. "Why are you not talking to me or looking me in my eyes?" She ignored me, opting to lean against the dresser with the mirror as she recorded. "Answer me," I said. She crossed her ankles and gently kicked her feet back and forth as if this were just a regular day. Answer me, I picked up an old-fashioned alarm clock from the nightstand and threw it at her. She dodged, and it shattered the mirror. She stood up and backed into a corner, her breathing becoming uneven, as if I was the crazy one. I got up off the bed. Vanessa, I swear to God, just like Yasmin had earlier, I lunged for the camera, and she shrieked in a wild sort of rage and valiantly fought me for it. I fell back, dragging her to the moldy carpet floor with me, and we wrestled with it, rolling around and grunting, squirming and writhing, slapping and pushing, our faces red and perspiring with effort. Finally, I pried the camera out of her hands, which felt like peeling gum off the sticky suction cups of a squid's tentacles. She jumped at me for it, and I held it out of reach, like my bullies did with my comfort toy back in elementary. When it became clear she wasn't getting the camera back, she sank to the floor and sobbed into her hands. "Why are you doing this?" I snapped at her. "Because I don't want to be here," Vanessa wailed, finally providing my question with an answer. "When I have the camera, I feel like I'm not here." I stomped over to her and kneeled down to her level. "Enough," I replied firmly. "Coping like this isn't helping. Whether you're watching behind a screen or not, you're here, and that won't change unless we get our shit together. Yaz and John aren't here. No one's trying to fix anything anymore." Vanessa wiped snot from her nose. "And we have less people to help without Bryce and Zach, and more people to worry about hiding from, too. We just need to give Yaz and John some time." "Okay," I put a hand on her shoulder and she nodded. "You look tired. Why don't you go take a nap and I'll stay up and keep watch?" Vanessa wiped dust off the old flowery comforter and lied on her side in the bed, pulling the drawstrings of Bryce's hoodie so that the hood closed tight over her face and only left her nose poking out. She was cold, but she didn't want to get under the covers, it seemed, and I didn't blame her. These houses were full of all kinds of bacteria. I decided I would give everyone maybe an hour, and made sure to check my watch. It was 12 a.m. I looked at the camera in my hands and decided to go through the footage so far. I sat in the corner by the window and made sure the volume was extremely low so that the noise wouldn't disturb Vanessa. I had to hold my hand over my mouth to muffle my gasps and squeaks of frights as at several different intervals during the recording. I saw glimpses of the ghost children hiding just within frame. They went unnoticed by us during the filming, which was a hard pill to swallow. How do you not notice a young boy with big gaping hollow sockets staring at you from the corner of the room? How do you not notice an eyeless little girl behind you, running past like she was playing a game of tag? But that wasn't the most disturbing thing I had noticed, not by a long shot. The footage reached the time where we frantically entered the room to find Bryce and Zach acting weird. As soon as they came into frame, the footage distorted for a split second with static appearing on screen, then went back to recording like normal. That wasn't the worst part, though. The worst part was that in the vanity mirror, I noticed something that made all the blood drain from my face. How we hadn't noticed before, I had no clue. I rewinded and paused the recording at the right time frame. Zach and Bryce's reflections in the mirror were different from how they looked to us. Their reflections had no eyes. Their reflections had no eyes. Just empty, black sockets. It wasn't a split-second frame either. Every moment where the camera catches their reflections, they appeared to have no eyes. The reality began to set in. I had been suspicious, but I hadn't known it was truly that bad. If anything, I thought the real Bryce and Zach were somewhere hurt, and these were just copies. The truth was they were eyeless wraiths, just like the 4 victims of the Eye Ripper, their spirits corrupted by the evil here. Soullessness hurts. That's what Zach had said. Zach fell victim to that boy in the basement. Then Bryce fell victim to Zach when we left them alone together. They wanted to lure us outside so they could jump us and take our eyes like their eyes had been taken. It was like a zombie infection type of thing, if your eyes were ripped out in this ghastly place. You ended up a monster as well, forced to haunt a limbo, looking for something you may never find, driven to mutilating living people despite it not doing anything but spreading the torment like a virus. I was determined not to end up like that. I wondered if any of us had looked at the mirror at any point, would we have seen the lack of eyes in the reflection, or was it only visible on camera? We were so distracted, of course, we didn't look at the vanity. I shuddered as I imagined what it would have felt like to discover such a horrifying thing with Zach and Bryce still in the room with us. But where were their bodies? If Zach was truly dead, why hadn't we found his corpse in the basement? Same with Bryce. Why hadn't we found his corpse in that room? Whatever the case, after seeing this, I wasn't willing to waste another moment sulking or grieving. I was going to gather everyone and look for more eyes. I had a feeling I knew how, too. I stood up from the corner with the intention of rousing Vanessa to ask her questions about the eye ripper case when something caught my eye. The window. The curtains that covered it had a small sliver of space open between them, where I saw a pale nose almost flush against the glass pane. Fear struck me like a lightning bolt, and I yanked one side of the curtain open to reveal a different ghost boy. The one in the basement had black hair. This one had brown hair and a little blood smudged under his nose. His head immediately shifted ever so slightly, so his hollow eye sockets were facing me. His little hands were pressed against the window. He looked like he was in a crouching position. It suddenly hit me that we were on the second floor. I'm going to find your eyes. I desperately tried to reason with the thing, so please leave me and my friends alone until then, okay? The boy stared at me with an emotionless face. Then his lower jaw unhinged, turning his mouth into an O shape, and a puff of vapor ghosted from between his white lips and fogged the glass. Slowly and mechanically he used a finger to draw a pair of eyes in the window. They were shaped like lemons with big irises and little pupils. I nodded eagerly, thinking I was getting somewhere with this. Yes, your eyes. I'm going to give them back to you. Then with his finger he erased the details off the eyes he drew, including the irises and pupils, until it looked like two darkened ovals. Mimicking empty eye sockets, I frowned. I knew the implication, but I wasn't sure if this was a threat aimed at me or if he was showing what had been done to him. I shook my head, not knowing what to say next. The boy simply crawled up and above the window, towards the roof, scaling the wall like a spider. I closed the curtains again, feeling myself tremble. That interaction didn't instill me with any hope at all. I could hear him crawling on the part of the roof above the room we were in, and it freaked me out, but I tried to ignore it as I continued my course of action. Could they get into the house? Yasmine said locked doors don't deter ghosts, but maybe she was wrong, or these were a different type of ghost. She told me about ghost categories in the past. Some of them follow the rules of the physical world, like being able to be hurt with blunt force. In any case, they clearly knew where we were. I woke Vanessa up and said, "We need to start trying to escape. I have to ask you some questions about the 4 kids." She rubbed her eyes and sat up, loosening her hood. Like what? Millie's eyes were hidden in her teddy, I began to explain as I paced the room, so I began to wonder, are the other eyes hidden like that? I dunno, she shrugged. Was her teddy noted as missing in the report, I asked. Yeah, the articles and news reports all mention she went missing with her stuffed bear, Vanessa replied. Did the other kids go missing with any objects? I chewed my lip in thought. Yes, actually, Vanessa perked up. Peter, the black-haired boy in the red shirt, went missing with his school backpack. Oh, and Sarah's little purse she got for her birthday was with her when she was kidnapped and wasn't found anywhere. What about the other kid, William? I began to grow hopeful. Let me think. I could see the cogs turning in Vanessa's head. Damn, I don't think I remember William going missing with anything other than the clothes on his back, she sighed. We'll figure that out later. I waved her worries away. Right now we're going to be on the lookout for that backpack and that purse. It's like you said, serial killers keep souvenirs. Those items were what the kids were last seen with, so he kept them for himself, and I guess he saw their eyes as souvenirs too. So he placed them inside those things, if my theory is right. I hope I'm right, at least. So, you think they're in the basement? She looked nervous. That should be the first place to check, I nodded. After all, the last time we went, we didn't know exactly what to look out for, and that basement is like the inside of a hoarder's house. Do you remember seeing anything like that down there? She shook her head. No. What's the color of the backpack and purse? Vanessa fought hard to remember. The backpack was a dark color, something from back in the day, and I don't remember the exact color. The purse was pink. It matched her shirt. I remember that much at least. Great, we just got to get Yaz and John and go back there, then we'll only need one more set of eyes. I marched towards the door, Vanessa hot on my heels. First I went to John's room and opened the door. He was lying on his side on a twin bed facing the wall. It looked like it had once been a little boy's room, but the boy in the old photograph on the floor wasn't any of the victims. Vanessa saw me looking at the picture. The neighbors moved out not long after the murders, she elaborated. They were very hush-hush about it and wouldn't answer any reporters' questions. I think they started to realize that this place was becoming ... like it is now. John, I called to him, walking over, we know how to find at least 4 other eyes. We just need to go back to that basement. I know it's scary as all hell, but we made it out just fine last time, and this is the only way to escape with our lives. He didn't answer me or move a muscle, and I sighed, wondering how I was going to get him to comply. Vanessa pointed, "Shut that window." "Why is it even open?" I looked over to see that, indeed, the window halfway obscured with dark blue drapes was wide open. Damn it, I went over and shut it, fairly fed up. "John, be a man and get your ass up." I started to feel uneasy as he refused to move. I exchanged a nervous glance with Vanessa. His stillness was reminding me too much of the ghost children, and I could feel the air thicken with tension. What if one of those entities had entered through the window? I slowly crept over to his bedside, steadily reaching my hand out then. I yanked his arm towards me, pulling his body onto his back. I expected to see him emotionlessly staring at me like Zach and Bryce had, but instead I saw red-rimmed eyes, a snotty nose, and cheeks glistening with tears. He wasn't a ghost, he was simply crying and ashamed. "Leave me alone," he pulled away from me. "Don't you want to get out of here?" Vanessa asked with frustration. "Stop wallowing and get up." I thought she was being a hypocrite, but I didn't say anything. Fine, John pushed himself up and wiped his tears away, "but I'm not going back to that basement." "Then where are you going?" I asked as he stood up. "You know those other 2 roads?" he asked me. "The ones that don't lead back to town. I'm going to try one of them. Even if they don't go back home, maybe they go somewhere far from here." I groaned. "You can't be serious. You think only that one road was affected by the curse here? You'll just end up right back here." "You two can go hunting for rotten eyes as much as you want," he snapped. "But I can't stay here. I can't, man." He rushed past us. "Wait," I called after him. "Zach and Bryce, remember." "I'll go through the back door," he called back. Whatever, my face felt hot from anger. "Let's go get Yaz. She won't abandon us." Vanessa and I went to the room where Yaz had run to. She was standing at the window, peeking out through a crack in the blinds at the front yard and street outside. The moonlight made her brown eyes sparkle along with her tears, and she seemed both pissed and depressed as she scanned the area for any signs of those wraiths. She didn't look up when we gently opened the door. "Yaz," I said softly so as not to startle her, creeping forward, "we gotta go. I have a plan." I saw an adult. Yasmine replied emotionlessly, and I could hear her swallow from across the room, as if she was forcing bile back down her throat. "What?" Vanessa and I said at the same time and looked at each other. She was back to holding the camera and recording, but her eyes were looking over the screen and at my best friend with hope glimmering in them. "An adult," Yasmine repeated, her gaze not leaving the window. "It was a woman. And she was standing beside that house over there," she pointed. "Just by the woods, so still I almost didn't notice her." "So someone else is trapped here." I tried to wrap my mind around this, stuck between thinking it was unfortunate for another person to be stuck in this dreadful place, but also being happy that we weren't alone. Truth be told, I was exhausted at playing the role of leader and wanted nothing more than a grown-up to make all the hard decisions for me. "Yeah, you can say that she still didn't look at us, but she's not alive like us. She had no eyes." My heart plummeted to the bottom of my stomach, and the look on Vanessa's face told me hers did the same. So Vanessa began. "The kids aren't the only ghosts here." "No," Yasmine shook her head, sounding numb. I thought of something and patted my pockets. I pulled out the phone I had found earlier, which was now fully charged from my power bank, and turned it on. I was met with the faces of 2 smiling women as the home screen. The most recently opened app at the bottom was the camera. I clicked on it and found a video, the date being a year ago. I heard Vanessa approaching my side to see what I was doing as I played the video. Frantic breaths and whimpering sobs immediately blasted from the speakers. "If anyone sees this." One of the women from the home screen had her sweaty, terrified face extremely close to the camera. "Tell my mom that I love her. Tell my fiancé that I'm so sorry that I couldn't come back to him." My name is Lisa Waller and I'm a journalist. I heard rumors about this place and... The distant sound of a twig snapping made the woman's head snap away from the camera. We could see that she was in the woods somewhere around this terrible street. The camera shook as she stood up and started running. "They won't let me leave," she desperately screamed as she ran for her life. "If you're here and you're listening to this, you need to find what's left of him here. That boy, Will, he was the last and he got free. He ran into the trees, but the killer caught him. His parents are part of the occult. He started this, I just know he did. Please, I don't want to be like them." "Jesus," I whispered, Vanessa in silent shock as she looked over my shoulder. Yasmine still hadn't moved from her spot, but she stared at us, unnerved. Suddenly, the camera was now focused on the ground as the woman dropped her phone and screamed gutturally, followed by a wet squelching sound and a resounding thud that shook the camera a bit. She was silent. Then Feed walked into the frame wearing sandals. The phone was picked back up, and we gasped as the camera focused on the eyeless corpse of Lisa Waller sprawled over the forest floor. "Your sacrifice won't be forgotten," a woman's voice hollowly said from behind the camera. I screamed as the camera flipped to the face of the other woman from the home screen picture, deathly pale with two gaping voids instead of eyes. She raised two bloodied, torn-out blue eyes to the camera. "Please come here," she pleaded to us in a quiet voice, almost as if she could see us. "If the body rejects the soul, we have to hunt again. We need you. Don't be afraid." We watched in horror as the specter brought the camera into the basement of the Eye Ripper house, her breath and sound of her footsteps eerily absent from the video as she traveled quicker than what appeared normal. The closer she got to the basement, the more the video glitched out, freezing and cutting forward by a few seconds. We could barely tell what was happening. It was dark and clearly the file was corrupted. Then finally her grotesque face again, barely visible in the darkness. "Why didn't it work?" she asked so quietly we almost couldn't hear her. "I can feel myself becoming nothing. What am I?" Then it ended. With jittery fingers, I dropped the phone, feeling as if it was still connected to that horrifying spirit and wanting to be rid of it entirely. It wouldn't help us anyway. There was, of course, no way of contacting the outside world, and I wasn't concerned about evidence at the moment. That phone and the pack of half-smoked cigarettes. I swallowed. Everyone who's come here ended up like this. That's why those were there. They're things left behind by people who died here. Who knows how many things in that basement weren't even there before it became abandoned? How much of that actually belonged there? I just couldn't seem to process it. It all felt like a bad dream. I knew it was weird, Vanessa started as she licked her lips, that some people who've been going missing the last few years were heard talking about visiting this place. How is that possible? I hounded her without meaning to, my stare intense. Didn't that raise any red flags with anyone? It did, but whenever people came investigating, there was no sign of them being here. None at all. Vanessa's eyes glazed over as she spoke the horrible truth. I've read all about it. The police always ended up saying it was more plausible they went missing on the way here because they never found any evidence the missing people even made it here. It's almost like this place just erases all of it, hides it. I turned to Yasmine. We know how to stop this. We just need to find an old-school backpack and a pink purse. It should have two of the kids' eyes in it. It's like a curse. If we get rid of it at the root, the victims of the Eye Ripper, I'm sure it'll set off a chain reaction and then everyone will be free. Dead or alive. This isn't a fucking movie, Grace. I was shocked by Yasmine's hardened tone and the way she stared at me. What you're doing is called wishful thinking. What I looked at her like she was out of her mind. Stop it. You saw how we survived the Jenkins girl. She took her eyes back and left and we haven't seen her since. She's gone from here. She's been appeased. And listen, there's something I need to tell you both. They looked at me curiously. I took a deep breath and broke the bad news about what I had seen on the camera. They didn't believe me until I instructed Vanessa to rewind to that part of the footage and they saw it for themselves. Oh my God, Yasmine choked out, clamping her hands over her mouth and closing her eyes as more tears squeezed from them. We were talking to them. And the entire time they were dead, Vanessa ran her quivering fingers through her hair. So they're just walking corpses, Yasmine bawled. Zombies or something. What the fuck is this place? She looked like she wanted to have a breakdown. Both of them did, but I knew I couldn't afford to let them do that if I wanted to go through with my plan. We couldn't afford to waste any more time grieving. "Listen," I said, shaking Yasmine's shoulders gently to snap her out of it. "We can't stay here and cry. We have to. Those two women fucking died here, didn't they?" Yasmine was suddenly invading my bubble, almost nose to nose with me with an angry glare. "What if you're wrong and we have to appease them too? What if there's a lot more than just them? How many people do you think tried to tour the house where one of the worst murder cases of the state happened over the last several years?" "Yaz, this isn't you." I shook my head. "You're optimistic. You're strong. You were the one who suggested finding their eyes in the first place. I'm also the one who brought you all here to begin with." Her voice cracked and the furious expression on her face melted into one of deep sorrow. "The idiot that got Zach and Bryce, John's friend and my boyfriend, killed." She turned away, refusing to let us see her wipe away her tears. "Don't sell yourself short." Yazzie Vanessa smiled and stepped forward, putting a hand on my friend's shoulder. "You didn't know." In an unexpected turn of events, Yasmine spun around and planted a hard smack on Vanessa's cheek, stunning her. "You two-timing bitch, you think that means anything coming from you?" her hoarse voice shrilled. "Keep it down," I shushed her, putting myself between the two. Yasmine shoved me out the way, cornering Vanessa. "I know you've been messing around with my boyfriend behind my back. Everyone said you were the easiest girl in school, a real skank, but I didn't listen, and I got tired of seeing your pitiful ass being left out all the time, so I made you my friend." Vanessa started crying. Afraid of being the object of Yasmine's wrath, I cowered away and meekly said, "Look, this isn't the best time to do this ... Let's get out of here and then you can tear her a new one." The last thing he ever did to me was turn his face away when I tried to kiss him. Yasmine grabbed Vanessa's throat and pushed her against the wall. Her fingers didn't tighten to strangle her, but rather they simply pinned her in place. "All night you two were acting like you were the ones dating. He's dead and I can't even remember him as a loyal boyfriend." Watching this unfold and seeing Vanessa pathetically weep without even struggling, a fire started to burn in me. I always let Yasmine get her way and let her drag me into things, and I was sick of being submissive. I wasn't going to stand there and let her devolve everything into chaos after I worked to keep us all in this together. Our lives were in danger, people were dead, and we didn't need this petty high school drama. "Get your hands off her, Yaz," I shouted as I pried my friend's fingers from my rival's throat. Yasmine looked at me shocked. "There's no time for this," I added in a quieter voice. "Things are trying to kill us, and this is what you're worried about. Look, I'm sorry to say it, but I had already told you I thought Bryce wasn't good for you. I mean, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but it needed to be said. And Vanessa has always been a jerk, so I don't know why you ever expected anything from her." Vanessa rubbed her arm up and down awkwardly, clearly disliking my insult but not having the guts to protest about it. "You're better than this." I pushed Yasmine's dark hair out her face. "And I'm sure if Bryce were here, he'd tell you he was sorry, however genuine it may be." I rolled my eyes, "And after this is over, you can dump Vanessa as a friend and never have to speak to her again. But until then, you have to keep it together so we can get the hell out of here." Yasmine didn't break my stare for a few moments. Finally, she sighed and murmured, "Okay, so what are we doing?" "Going back to that basement and finding a pink purse and a backpack that may have belonged to Sarah and Peter," I replied, relieved she was behaving herself. "They likely have their eyes in them. It's worth a shot." "Fine, then let's do it. Let's do it and get out of here." Cesar walked out the room and suddenly turned to Vanessa to jab a finger at her face. "And after this, you're back to being a loser slut." Vanessa didn't answer, but by the look on her face, she seemed hurt, despite her own betrayal. As we went down the hall, I explained John's absence to Yasmine, who seemed exasperated that he had truly left on his own on a futile suicide mission, and then gathered our courage to leave that house which had seemed like a safe haven. We went downstairs, our steps quiet, and towards the utility room where the back door lay, a white solid door and a screen door behind it, in the right-hand corner of a small rectangular area where a washing machine, dryer, and pantry was located. I was in the lead, and I silently opened the first door. The window of the screen door revealed the overgrown backyard, drenched in darkness and just barely lit with moonlight from a full moon. At this time you should have been able to hear the nightly cacophony of nocturnal insects, maybe even seen fireflies, but there was no sign of life whatsoever. It felt like someone had hit the mute button of the remote on the world, same as you would to a movie. I hated it more than anything, as it made it feel all the more lonely. The girls right behind me, I tried to open the screen door as quietly as possible, but since it was aged, rusted, and weathered, it would not yield without sound. The hinges squeaked, the doors groaned, increasing in pitch and volume as I eased it outward. We all cringed visibly, with Vanessa being at the back and looking over her shoulder, and Yasmin and I peeking around the backyard, which hadn't been tended to in quite some time. There was no one, dead or otherwise. We stepped onto the cement doorstep one by one, and then our feet tread long and dead grass, which should have been teeming with bugs but wasn't. We crept to the edge of the left side of the house, where several feet of wide open space lay between us and the Eye Ripper house's back door. We would be vulnerable, shadowed by the treetops but still highlighted by moonlight and uncovered by any building. Anything could spot us, and we had to work our nerves up before we could even think about making a run for it. I peeked around the corner of the wall to be sure the street, or at least how much I could see of it, was empty. What came next happened so fast it makes my head spin just thinking about it in the present. First, a scream rang out from Vanessa, and Yasmin and I followed her terrified gaze over to the tree line at the edge of the backyard. I noticed the pink shirt and long blonde hair right off the bat. Sarah Miller's ghoulish face was soaked in shadow as it stared lifelessly at us. She was so still she may as well have been a doll made to stand upright between two trees. My mind shifting to autopilot as the scared animal inside me yearned to get as far as possible, I turned to run, only to be face to face with the visage of the eyeless brunette boy, William. I felt his fingers dig into my eyes, and I blindly shoved him away with a shout of pain and ran. I was heading for the Eye Ripper house, and I could hear Vanessa and Yasmin screaming as they followed me. The back door was getting tantalizingly closer. Then it opened, and Zach walked out. The illusion was broken, and it was very clear to us that he was missing his eyes as well. What he was doing in the house I had no idea, but as soon as he saw us, his face balled up and he burst into tears while charging at us. The tears were made of blood, and his mouth stiffly moved with his whimpers as his sockets narrowed from being pushed down by his furrowed eyebrows. "The car," Yasmin screamed, grabbing my hand and dragging me towards the street. "Grace," Zach called, his voice on the verge of breaking with emotion, but not quite there yet. I couldn't take my eyes off him as he flailed his arms outwardly while running to catch up with us. I got away. His voice heightened in pitch with a sense of deranged euphoria, and he smiled. "Thank Christ I got away, I did. I got away, Grace, I did." We were almost to the car when Vanessa shrieked as she got yanked backwards by Bryce, who wrapped his arms around her neck and face with his fingers wriggling for her eyes like worms. She closed her eyes and tried to force his hands off her, crying out in terror. Yasmin pushed me towards the car and launched herself at him, wrestling him off of Vanessa and tackling him to the ground. I hurriedly climbed into the driver's side of John's car as a crying Vanessa scrambled backwards on the asphalt, watching my friend fight the ghost. Seeing her in this state, I got out of the car and grabbed her under her arms, pulling her into the driver's side seat. "Come on, Vanessa, hurry," I screeched, white-hot panic flashing through me at the sight of all the wraiths we'd encountered heading right for us. Zach was running clumsily like a madman, Sarah was gliding forward an inch off the ground, and William was crawling and scrabbling along the pavement like an oversized spider. Once Vanessa was in the seat, she closed the door, and I was about to get in myself, but I turned to see Yaz still struggling with Bryce. He stuck a finger and thumb into her right socket, trying to pluck her eye out, and the still night air was filled with cries of pain. Quickly, I yanked Bryce off of her by his hair and shoved my fingers into his eye sockets, hoping to stun him. It felt freezing cold inside and wet, but when I took my fingers out, they weren't wet at all. "Don't leave us," Bryce begged, his voice flowing out his gaping mouth without his lips moving. He slowly stood up. "We need you." Just as the others descended upon us, I helped Yasmin to her feet, and we scrambled into the car, shutting and locking the doors behind us. We were now trapped, with eyeless wraiths surrounding us, including our former friends. They put their hands against the windows and pressed their faces into the glass, making sure we felt their hollow stares piercing deep into our beings. Then, after a short while, Sarah was beside my window, covering her face with her hands again, but facing me as if she was ready to play a game of peekaboo with a baby. William decided to crawl up the hood of the vehicle and onto the roof, his face frozen in an expression that reminded me of the Ghostface mask. He simply crawled around up there without end. Then Peter, as if he'd been told fresh eyes were for sale by the others, was standing a few feet away from the car and simply watching intently. Bryce and Zach paced in slow circles around us, meandering with emotionless expressions. We all refused to look at them, instead choosing to either look down at our laps or at each other. Vanessa let the camera go limp in her hands as she buried her face in her lap, giving up on recording for the time being. Yasmine pulled her hood to her sweat jacket over her head and covered her eyes with her hair. I looked up at the ceiling of the car, thinking over my life choices which led me here. "We have to escape," Yasmine suddenly said after a while, turning to look at me in the back seat. How I asked without looking at her, annoyed at her just saying the obvious. "I'm also open to suggestions," Vanessa said as she watched William crawl from the roof down the hood for the 100th time. "I'm gonna lead them away," Yasmine replied, making us both gawk at her like she was crazy. She noticed our look and sighed. "I've thought about it long and hard, and I'm gonna make a run for it. I'm gonna run around one of these roads and keep all of them distracted long enough for you two to find what you're looking for." "That's insane," Vanessa said. "I want to see if I can find John out there anyways," Yasmine replied. "I don't want to leave without him, and he's the muscle of the group." "You think you can really outrun all of them?" I asked incredulously. "I run track, Grace." She smiled weakly at me. "Even in death those lame OS can't beat me, and if I run out of breath I'll hide. Or maybe I might even make it out somehow and I can get help. Either way, I'm doing this. I got us into this mess, so I'm going to take one for the team. Don't try to stop me, okay?" My eyes started to water and I sniffed. "You don't fucking die on us, okay?" I sternly snapped at her. "We'll do this and you're going to escape with us, all right?" "All right." Yasmine leaned over to hug me tightly. Her embrace felt warm and comforting as it always had. "I'm sorry about Bryce," Yasmine, Vanessa said, refusing to make eye contact, and it was clear she wasn't just talking about his loss. "Yeah," Yasmine nodded, then faced forward and took several deep breaths. She waited for Bryce to pass by her door, and before Zach could make it around, she slammed open the door and ran out. Vanessa quickly shut it behind her. All the entities stopped their creepy activities and watched her for a moment, then immediately gave chase in their respective ways. Vanessa and I held our breaths as we watched Yasmine lead them down the street, past the abandoned houses and into the crossroads. She continued straight on, knowing it would only bring her back. "Let's go." I climbed out the car with Vanessa and we ran into the Eye Ripper house through the front door. There seemed to be no wraiths in sight. There's a stretch of woods, not too far from where I live, where the trees grow so thick you can't see much past 10 feet in any direction. I had hiked the woods before, but never went far. It's all pines, packed together like they're trying to choke out the sky, and the farther you walk into them, the darker it gets. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a way to clear my head. I'd had a shitty week, work was kicking my ass, and my girlfriend had just left me. She said I was distant, disconnected, I couldn't argue with her. I'd felt off for months. It was like everything was just a little out of sync, like I was living a half second behind everyone else. So I drove out to the woods, hoping the quiet might help. It was late afternoon when I started walking. The sun was still up, but by the time I hit the tree line, the pines swallowed it. The air got cooler, the shadows longer, and every step felt like it took me farther from the world I knew. But that's what I wanted, a little space, a little distance. I walked for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper, until I started to wonder whether I could find my way back. That's when I saw it, the cabin. It was barely visible through the pines, just a dark shape nestled between the trunks, like it had been there forever, forgotten by the world. I walked past the trees to the clearing where the cabin was. The wood was gray with age, the roof sagging, and one of the windows was shattered. It didn't look welcoming, but something about it drew me in. I stepped out of the trees and onto the overgrown path leading to the cabin's front door. I should have turned around. I don't know why I didn't. I just wanted to look inside. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust. There was hardly any light except for the dim glow filtering through the trees outside. The floor was covered in dirt and debris, broken glass, leaves, something that might have been bones, though I didn't look too closely. I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was just the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the small space, but then I heard it again, first a shuffle, then a breath, and then a voice. "Welcome, stranger." I froze. The voice was low, almost a whisper, but it came from deeper inside the cabin, from the shadows. My heart hammered in my chest. "Oh, I'm sorry," I stammered, and I turned to leave, but the door had swung shut behind me, trapping me in the dark. The voice came again, clearer this time. "You've come far, but this is where you stay." I couldn't see anyone, but I felt something, a presence. It wasn't friendly. My legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the floor, and the air around me seemed to thicken. My head swam, and suddenly I wasn't sure where I was. The cabin felt wrong, like it wasn't just a building, but something alive, something watching. I took a step back, my foot crunching on the debris beneath me, and that's when I noticed it. The cabin was changing. The walls began to shift, move, and change direction. The room almost felt like it was breathing, expanding and contracting in slow, shallow breaths. The windows, where there should have been fading light from outside, were now pitch black, as if the cabin had disappeared entirely into a void. And the floor beneath my feet ... It wasn't dirt and debris anymore. It was stone, cold, damp stone. I don't know how long I stood there, watching the impossible changes, but when I turned around, the front door was gone. In its place was a hallway, a long, narrow corridor stretching out into the dark. The voice came again, closer now. "Keep going." I didn't want to, but I didn't have a choice. My feet moved on their own, carrying me down the hall, the walls pressing in on me as I went. The deeper I went, the more everything around me twisted. The floor sloped at impossible angles, the walls pulsed like they were alive, and the air grew thicker, harder to breathe. And the voice, God, the voice, it followed me, whispering things I couldn't understand, words that didn't make sense but filled me with dread. By the time I reached the end of the hall, I wasn't even sure if I was still in the cabin. The space around me was wrong, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The walls were lined with symbols, crude, jagged things carved into the wood and stone, symbols that seemed to shift when I looked away. My head ached, and time ... time wasn't right anymore. I checked my phone, but the screen was blank. No signal, no time, nothing. My watch had stopped, its hands frozen in place. I couldn't tell how long I'd been there, minutes, hours, days. It didn't matter. There was no escape. At the end of the hallway, there was a door. Old, rotted, hanging on rusty hinges. I didn't want to open it, but the voice now right beside me, breathing in my ear, left me no choice. Open it. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling. The door swung open on its own, revealing a room. The room was white, bright white. White walls, white floor, bright white light, and single metal chair. And sitting in the chair was ... me. I don't know how to explain it. It was me, but old, gaunt, pale, like I hadn't seen sunlight in years. My eyes were sunken, my skin stretched tight over my bones. The other me looked up, meeting my gaze, and smiled. "Finally, I said. "It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen." "Sit," the voice said. It wasn't just in my head anymore, it was coming from the other me. I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind me. There was nowhere to go. The other me stood, moving with a slow, deliberate grace, and stepped toward me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The other me reached out, his hand cold and clammy, and touched my shoulder. The moment he did, everything changed. I was in the chair now, looking at the door, the same door I had just come through. I could feel the presence all around me, the same cold, malevolent force that had followed me from the moment I entered the cabin. I waited for what felt like eternity, stuck in the chair. It felt as if decades passed. I watched my body grow old, gaunt, and pale. And then the door opened and someone stepped in. It was me. Again. This cabin, this place that traps you, it twists you, breaks you, and then it makes you part of it. A loop, an endless cycle of fear and confusion, of watching yourself walk through the door over and over again, knowing what was coming but powerless to stop it. The voice spoke one last time as I watched myself approach the chair. "Welcome home." I feel like I was in the loop for centuries. Time doesn't work the same way in the cabin. It's endless. Every moment stretches out like an eternity, and yet it all blurs together. I've lost track of how many times I've watched myself walk through that door and sit in this chair, growing old until I walk through the door again. Every time myself approaches the chair, I'm then in the chair again, but younger again. But I began to feel a change. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the air. The presence, though it never spoke to me again, didn't feel like it was watching me anymore. Almost as if it was distracted. I could feel it shifting its focus elsewhere. I didn't understand why until the door creaked open. It wasn't me this time. It was someone else, someone new, someone fresh. He was younger than me, maybe in his early 20s, with shaggy hair and a confused expression on his face. He looked around the room like I had when I first came here, his eyes wide with fear and disbelief. And then he saw me sitting in the chair. I wanted to warn him. I wanted to tell him to turn back, to run, but the words wouldn't come. I could only watch as he moved closer. Then, for the first time, I felt like I had control over my body again. I stood up facing the man. I knew what I was supposed to do. I placed my hand on his shoulder, like the older me had done the first time I entered it, though. Was it the first time? Through tired breath, I forced out the words, "It's your turn." The man was then in the chair, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, I crossed the threshold back out into the hallway to leave the cabin. I turned one last time to the room, to the man, a look of terror in his eyes, his body now paralyzed in the chair. "I'm sorry," I said to him before turning. Leaving the cabin, I no longer felt as if the presence was watching me. I knew it was done with me. Its focus now on its new prize. The moment I stepped out of the cabin, the air changed, the oppressive weight lifted completely, and the suffocating darkness that had surrounded me for so long was gone. I was back in the woods, standing under a sky that was now a brilliant, blinding blue. I fell to my knees, gasping for air. The pines swayed gently in the breeze, birds chirped overhead, and the world felt real again. But it should have been different. After everything I'd endured, surely the world outside had changed. Surely centuries had passed. With shaky legs, I made my way out of the pines. My car was still parked at the edge of the woods, right where I'd left it. The trees looked the same, the path untouched. Even the air smelled the same, crisp and cool, like it had that first afternoon when I walked into the forest. I pulled out my phone. The screen flickered to life, displaying the date and time. It had only been a few hours. I looked at myself in the camera, and I looked fine. My breath hitched, and I stumbled back, staring at the device in disbelief. Somehow, despite everything I'd been through, despite the endless time I'd felt trapped in that hellish loop, almost no time had passed at all. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I drove home in a daze, the events of the cabin swirling in my mind. When I pulled into my driveway, everything was the same. The neighbors' cars were parked where they always were. The street was quiet, familiar. But I know what happened. I know that place, whatever it is, exists. And somehow, impossibly, I've been given another chance. But I know one thing, I will never step foot back in those woods. I know if I do, I might not be lucky enough to get out a second time. And if you ever find yourself walking through the pines and you see a cabin, run. When I was 16, my friends and I went to this water park just outside of town. It was the kind of place everyone knew about: twisting slides, massive wave pools, a lazy river winding through a fake jungle. But there was something else everyone knew too, something whispered among the older folks' stories about the water park being built on old, cursed land. Some said it was once a burial ground, others believed it was the site of strange rituals long ago. We laughed off those stories back then, eager for a summer day filled with fun. Looking back, I wish I had paid more attention to those warnings. The day we went, it was a blisteringly hot afternoon. The kind where the air shimmers over the asphalt, and you can practically see the heat waves. The park was packed. Families, screaming kids, groups of teenagers like us. It was chaos in the best way. We dove into the action right away, racing down slides, dunking each other in the wave pool, and floating aimlessly in the lazy river. Everything felt normal, or at least it did at first. But even then I had this nagging feeling, like a subtle chill that ran down my spine whenever I glanced at the park's towering slides. It felt as if someone or something was watching us. By midday, we were ready for the Abyss, the park's most infamous slide. It was the main attraction, standing tall at the far end of the park. The slide twisted and turned in the air, almost reaching the clouds, or so it seemed. There was a rumor that once you started the descent, you wouldn't see daylight until you shot out the other end. We laughed about it while standing in line, trying to ignore the cold sweat on our backs. As we climbed the seemingly endless staircase to the top, the air around us grew heavier. The higher we went, the quieter it got. The usual noise of the park laughter, splashing water, music blaring from the speakers faded, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from the slide itself. My friend Tim noticed my unease. He was always the jokester of our group, a guy who never took anything seriously. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he teased, nudging me. "Scared of a little water?" I forced a laugh, trying to ignore the way my heart pounded in my chest. When it was finally my turn, I hesitated for just a second before pushing myself into the tube. As soon as I entered, everything changed. The slide was pitch black, darker than I had ever imagined it could be. The water that rushed around me was ice cold, almost painfully so, and it felt thicker, like I was sliding through some strange, dense liquid. The slide twisted sharply, throwing me from side to side, and it felt like I was descending deeper and deeper into the earth. Panic set in when I realized that the slide was far longer than it should be. It felt like I was sliding for minutes, not seconds. The usual thrill of a water slide turned into something else, fear, raw and paralyzing. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness around me felt alive, pressing in on all sides. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the slide changed again. The water around me grew still, almost solid, and then, without warning, the world shifted. I was no longer sliding but falling, plummeting into a vast, endless pool of pitch-black water. My stomach lurched as I dropped, and then I was underwater, flailing and gasping for air. The water was frigid, like ice needles piercing every inch of my skin. I kicked and thrashed, fighting my way to the surface. When I finally broke through, gasping for breath, I looked around. I was still in the park, but it wasn't the same place I had entered. The bright, sunny day was gone, replaced by a sky that was a dull, overcast gray. The water around me was eerily calm, reflecting the sky like a dark mirror. I spun around looking for the lifeguard who was supposed to be at the pool's end, but all I saw was a shadowy figure standing at the edge. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in a lifeguard uniform that looked faded and old. His face was hidden in shadow. His eyes, if he had any, were voids that seemed to pull me in. I yelled for help, but he didn't move, didn't react. His stillness was more terrifying than if he had lunged at me. I dragged myself out of the pool, my body trembling uncontrollably. The park around me was nearly empty. The once crowded wave pool was now filled with only a handful of figures floating aimlessly, their faces turned upward, eyes wide and unseeing. They were eerily still, bobbing with the faint movement of the water. I recognized some of them. They were people I had seen earlier, kids and adults who had been laughing and playing not long ago. Now they looked like lifeless dolls. My heart was beating so fast as I walked to the snack bar. The place looked empty. The bright snack stands had turned gray, and the food inside was rotten and moldy. I looked through the glass of one stand, and I saw my reflection. But it wasn't my face. It was me, but not really. My eyes were hollow, my skin looked pale and sick. I stumbled back, almost falling, my breath coming out in quick gasps. I turned around looking for my friends. I shouted for Tim, for anyone, but my voice just echoed back at me in the empty park. No one answered. Then I heard a melody. It was a soft, haunting tune that seemed to come from everywhere at once. At first it was quiet like a lullaby, but it grew louder with each step I took. The sound led me toward the lazy river, but it wasn't the same. Now it was a slow, dark stream surrounded by dead trees and twisted vines. As I got closer, the air became colder. The melody changed into whispers. They were soft and hard to understand, but they filled my head. I knelt by the river, looking into the murky water. Shadows moved underneath, writhing and shifting. My reflection was there again, but this time there were figures behind me. They had no faces, just empty, staring eyes. I jumped back, my heart racing. The whispers grew louder, turning into strange cries. I had to leave. I ran as fast as I could, my footsteps echoing around me. I sprinted past the wave pool, which was now a black, empty void, and past the slides that looked like twisted monsters against the dark sky. The park was no longer fun. It was a maze that seemed to change with every turn I made. I reached the gates where we had come in earlier. They were shut tight, locked with thick, rusty chains. I pounded on the gate, screaming for help, but everything outside was silent. It felt like the water park had trapped me, holding me in its creepy grip. I slid down, my hands cold against the metal, tears running down my face. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I jumped and turned around. It was Tim. His face was pale and his eyes were wide with fear. "Where have you been?" he asked. His voice was shaky. "We've been looking for you for hours." I stared at him, confused. Suddenly everything was normal again. The sun was shining, and I could hear people laughing and splashing in the water. My friends stood around me, looking worried. I tried to tell them what happened, the slide, the darkness, the shadows, but the words came out all wrong. Tim shook his head, his face showing he didn't believe me. "You must have passed out or something," he said, trying to make sense of it all. But I could see it in his eyes. He was scared. They all were. They helped me up, and we left the park quickly. As we walked out, I looked back at the abyss. It was tall and scary against the bright sky. It looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. We never talked about that day again. My friends wanted to forget it, to act like it never happened. But I couldn't. I knew something real had happened. The water park wasn't just haunted. It was alive, a twisted place that had pulled me into its world, showing me things I wasn't meant to see. Years have passed since then. Sometimes when I drive by the park, I feel it watching me. From the outside, it looks normal, bright slides, kids running, families having fun. But I know the truth. I've heard more stories since then. People go to the park and come back different, or sometimes they don't come back at all. Some people say the park is cursed, that it traps souls and messes with reality. Others think it's a doorway to another world where things aren't what they seem. I don't know what's true. All I know is that it's still there, waiting. The TV flickered, casting restless, jittering shadows that danced across the living room walls. I sat on the couch, fighting to stay awake, the low murmur of the late-night news playing like background static. Sleep had been coming in fits and starts these days, with exhaustion gnawing at the edges of my mind, threatening to pull me under. That's when it happened. The scream. It wasn't just any scream, though it was my son's. You don't mistake something like that. It was sharp, like a nail driven into your brain, the kind of scream that rips you from whatever half-slumber you've been clinging to and makes your heart stutter in your chest. I was off the couch before I even realized I was moving, feet slapping against the hardwood, the old floorboards creaking under my weight. The hallway felt darker than usual, like the shadows were pressing in, clinging to me. The scream still echoed in my head as I reached his room. My hand paused on the doorknob. Why? I don't know. Maybe because some primal part of me knew that whatever was in there wasn't normal. It wasn't just a bad dream. I twisted the knob, the door groaning as it swung open. My son was sitting up in bed, huddled under his blanket, his small body trembling like a leaf in the wind. His face was wet with tears, wide-eyed and terrified. I rushed to his side, feeling that same old wave of helplessness I'd come to know too well. "Daddy," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "there's a monster under my bed." I forced a smile, that old practiced lie rising to the surface. "There are no monsters, buddy," I said, my voice sounding too thin, too strained. But his eyes, his eyes said something different. They were too wild, too full of a terror that didn't belong to the world of a child. He wasn't just scared, he was knowing. His finger, trembling, pointed downward toward the dark space beneath his bed. I knelt beside him, my knees pressing into the cold floor, and looked under the bed, hoping to find nothing but dust and forgotten toys. But instead, I saw something that made my stomach lurch. My son was under the bed. The real him. His face was streaked with tears, his little hands clamped tight over his mouth, holding back a sob as his wide, pleading eyes stared into mine. He removed his hands just long enough to whisper, "Daddy, there's a monster on my bed." My throat tightened. I slowly looked back up, knowing what I was about to see, but praying I was wrong. Sitting on the bed was the thing that looked like my son but wasn't. It sat there with a strange, almost mechanical stillness, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Its skin was pale, the kind of pale that doesn't belong to anything alive. And its eyes, Jesus, those eyes. They were nothing but dark, empty voids sucking in the light around them, swallowing it whole. And that smile, that twisted, impossible smile that stretched far too wide across its face, showing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth, each one glinting in the faint moonlight streaming through the window. The thing moved, its body jerking in sharp, staccato motions like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. Before I could react, it lunged at me. Its long, clawed fingers clamped around my throat, cold and impossibly strong, pinning me to the floor. My mind screamed, but no sound came out. It held me there, those hollow eyes staring down at me, and then it did the unthinkable. Its other hand, those filthy blackened claws, reached for my face. I felt the sharp, bone-like nails dig into my skin, ripping through the flesh with a sickening, wet sound. It tore into me, peeling the skin from my face like a butcher skinning an animal. The pain was beyond anything I could have imagined, white-hot, blinding. I felt my own blood running down my neck, felt the air hit the raw, exposed muscle beneath. It was like every nerve in my body had been set on fire. My vision swam and the room tilted as my face was ripped apart in a frenzy of violence. I wanted to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. All I could do was gurgle, blood filling my mouth, choking me. My hands flailed uselessly, trying to fight back, but the thing was too strong. It loomed over me, its teeth bared in that grotesque rictus grin, and then I woke up. Just like that. I sat bolt upright on the couch, gasping for air, drenched in cold sweat. My heart was hammering in my chest, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. The TV was still on, the light flickering, throwing more of those damn shadows across the room. For a second, I just sat there breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. It had been a nightmare, just a nightmare. But God, it had felt so real. Instinctively, I reached up and touched my face, expecting to feel the slick, torn mess I'd just experienced. But no, my face was intact, whole. I let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through me. That's when I heard it. The scream. It was my son again. His terrified cry echoed down the hallway, the same blood-curdling sound that had torn me from sleep in the first place. My stomach dropped. This time it wasn't a dream. I stood every step toward his room heavy, as if the air itself was thick with dread. The door was ajar, just a sliver of darkness waiting for me. I knew in the pit of my soul that whatever had been in my dream ... wasn't just in my head. It was still here. God help us both. Nathaniel's fingers trembled as his calloused hands gripped the shovel's handle. Its rusty edge plunged into the earth beneath him. The graveyard was bathed in an eerie fog. An orange glow from the gas lamps cast long, twisted shadows along the cast iron gates and cracked headstones. He tried not to look at the name etched into the gravestone below him. Eliza Wilkins' beloved wife. It had been 5 years since she passed, leaving him a widower at the tender age of 32. The pain still felt like a gaping, open wound. In her absence, addiction took hold. Nathaniel wished he'd been a stronger man, but the stable reflection of his past had shattered soon after his beloved's death. His money dried up, along with any job prospects in his forsaken town. Nathaniel had resorted to robbing the graves of the wealthy, prying jewelry from their brittle dead hands and selling it to those who would buy it in the seedy underbelly of his town. At first, he wasn't caught up in moral dilemmas, robbing only the most nefarious dead, corrupt politicians, crime bosses, and other known deviants. But those plots had long since been cleaned out. The black market didn't pay what his plunders were worth, nor did it cover the expenses of his living and his ever-growing addictions. Now his shovel scraped against the hallowed ground where his beloved Eliza rested. "Forgive me," he whispered as he took a swig from his flask and dove the blade of his shovel into the soil. To both his relief and dismay, the earth was softer than he expected. With haste, he uncovered the top of the casket. It sat, staring at him in the moonlight. The orange glow of the gas lamps flickered off of it and shimmered in the pools of tears that welled in his eyes. Warm streaks formed on his dirt-covered cheeks. The casket lid creaked open with an ominous, rusty groan. Nathaniel's heart pounded, dreading yet yearning to see her face once more. To his surprise, she was far more intact than he would have ever imagined. What he thought would have been the skeletal remains of his wife's corpse were instead a much more preserved form, still decayed and mangled from the passage of time, but still very much intact as well. Again he quenched his thirst from his flask. More tears streamed from his cheeks as he reached down to remove Eliza's wedding ring, the ring he'd bought in what felt like a different life. Something began to move underneath her burial dress. Startled, he pulled his hand back, ready to strike whatever creature emerged from the fabric. A low, gurgling moan left Eliza's lips, and her milky, accusing eyes shot open. Maggots squirmed from the cavities on her face, and her jaw creaked open wider as her moaning intensified. She sat up and began to twist and contort. Then he heard flesh tearing and saw a gush of black fluid pour from the bottom of her dress. Some abominable spawn slithered from Eliza, convulsed and unfurled in a burst of grotesque afterbirth. This thing was both human and insectile. It held the shape of an infant but had many blinking eyes covering the front of its face. Thin, wiggling tendrils fell from its mucousy orifice of a mouth and flopped against the wood of the casket like a fish out of water. Coarse hair, still covered in the vile afterbirth, wiggled and shifted on its skin. All of its eyes darted in different directions frantically, seeming to search for something unseen. Its darting eyes stopped and locked onto Nathaniel all at once. His mouth, agape in horror, quickly filled with several writhing tendrils that fell from the mouth of the infant creature. An intense breath left him as memories of his past grave desecrations came rushing back in kaleidoscopic shards. The tendrils went deeper into him, and for a brief moment, the creature was beautiful to him. It was as if he were seeing visions from behind the veil of mortality projected by an eldritch being plucked from the most unimaginable abyss. Everything went black, and then again he was shown a flowing collage of his past defilements of sacred resting spaces. Each one of his memories came all at once, as if he were looking through the many eyes of the creature itself. Nathaniel thought the creature was a blasphemy against the cycle of life and death, as were his many misdeeds. A profound disgust churned within him as he finally understood the full conscience of his actions. He had exploited the hallowed ground for its resources. Each tombstone marked a lifetime of experiences, personalities, and memories that he had sullied. These resting places were meant to guide those who passed through the ether, like the setting sun or the changing of the seasons. What Nathaniel had done was an affront to nature itself. It was an insult to the natural order of life and death. Guilt washed over him as he realized the torment of the restless spirits he had left in his wake. The tormented souls he disturbed were now bound to the mortal plane, lingering and restless. Something snapped inside of him. The visions in Nathaniel's mind froze and then shattered like stained glass windows being pelted with stones. He felt the twitching tendrils slide from his throat and out of his mouth. As his sight returned, Nathaniel saw finger-sized larvae emerging from the dirt around him, fat, bloated grubs. They were covered in a green, glowing mucus that mingled with the light of the gas lamps. Eliza was still moaning loudly, and the creature that came from her seemed to be gasping for air. Many more larvae began to fall from the dirt walls all around him, piling in and all around the casket. They reeked of decay, and Nathaniel almost choked on his vomit. He watched in revulsed fascination as they began to burrow into Eliza. They became a blanket of undulating flesh writhing in the gloom of the moonlight and gas lamps, and soon they would be upon him. Nathaniel quickly grabbed onto dangling roots and used protruding stones as footholds as he climbed from the grave. Some of the larvae had attached themselves to his dirt-covered pants, and he flailed his legs violently as he pulled himself out of the hole. Horror gripped him, but he also battled with the lingering guilt of the visions he had been shown. More warm, salty paths appeared on his grime-covered cheeks as he scrambled to his feet. He looked back and saw Eliza peeking over the edge of her grave, covered in a wiggling blanket of glowing grubs. She screamed, and Nathaniel started to run. He fled blindly into the night. Eliza's voice echoed through the graveyard, and the shrieks of the spirits he had disturbed reverberated through his mind. He ran until he could run no further, finally collapsing by a gnarled oak tree in a park on the outskirts of town. Huddled beneath the twisted branches, he wept. The sun's first rays came over the horizon, and the warm light hit his face. His nightmare of an evening had come to an end. The cycle of night and day continued. Rays of sun shot between the planks of a small fence on the perimeter of the park. They made straight lines of light on the grass all around him. Then he realized that time moves just like the light, in a straight line. He couldn't change the things he had done, but Nathaniel knew what he must do. He would become a gravekeeper and work to restore and maintain the sacred spaces he had desecrated. The branches of the oak tree in front of him swayed in the morning breeze. He reached out and touched the tree's trunk. In death, all things reunite as equals under the bark of mortality's great tree, each branch a life and each leaf a soul.